Look at these two charts. These represent the player bases of Crusader Kings 2 and Crusader Kings 3, one of Paradox's most famous IPs. Crusader Kings 2 put Paradox as a game studio and genre on the map for me, but a lot has changed since 2013, when I began playing it. And in the time since CK3 saw the light of day, it's managed to stay more relevant than CK2 ever did, reaching average concurrent multiplayers the latter could only dream of. But does the quality of the game match the increased player numbers? One of the biggest complaints I had back in September of 2020, god that feels like ages ago, was that even though CK3 offered a sound and competent foundation for a great next-gen Crusader Kings experience, it didn't offer half of the intricacies CK2 had come to offer by that point in time. But all these years later, has this changed at all? Is CK3 worth either returning to or picking up for the first time all these years later? At this point? In this video, I'll tell you about everything that makes this game tick, first by going through the entire game as it is right now, and then proceed to talk about each DLC that's come out thus far, even though some aspects I deem vital will be discussed when appropriate. A ton of work has gone into making this video as in-depth as possible, so I truly and heartfully appreciate if you would consider leaving a like on the video after watching, share your thoughts with a comment, and subscribe to the channel. But hold up just a second. I'm definitely not the only one with opinions on CK3, so I decided to ask some of my fellow YouTubers and true legends in this community for their thoughts.
Hello everyone, I'm Snap Strategy and I've been asked to give some general thoughts on Crusader Kings 3. And with about 2,000 hours in the game, there's a lot I could say. The biggest thing for me is that there is not a single other game out right now that does anything similar. It's so easy to get immersed with your family, vassals and neighbouring rulers all interacting and living their own lives. Compared to other games with more of a focus on the actual nations, so much random stuff can happen between characters that just always keeps the game feeling fresh. But on the other hand, if you do play it without much care for the characters and instead just fully focus on expanding your land, once you're slightly experienced in the game, it ends up being pretty easy most of the time, as there's not really too much stopping you, other than maybe vassal uprisings, but even then, you can manage them. Which is something I would like to see expanded, increasing the difficulty of factions, maybe with other rulers able to fund factions in your realm, or even some members of a faction being a secret to catch you off guard. But overall, I'm really happy with the direction the game's taking with the last few DLCs.
Hello everyone, my name is Koifish, and I play a lot of Crusader Kings 3. Andy has asked me about what I think about the game, so I'll keep it short. I like the game overall. It's perfect for creating your own stories, and really lets you play out your own medieval rulership fantasies. But it's been almost 4 goddamn years, and they still haven't put Glitterhoof, the Horse Chancellor, back in the game through Crusader Kings 2. That, and the AI can barely handle the Crusades in the current build. The literal thing that the game gets its name from. But in the end, there's no other game out there that offers the very same thing as Crusader Kings 3. And with the amazing modding community creating masterpieces like After the End, CK3 A Game of Thrones, Elder Kings 2, and The Realms in Exile, there's always going to be something new to experience in CK3. The new updates and DLCs also look very promising. I'm pretty damn hopeful for what's to come. But I swear to God, Paradox, if you don't add Glitterhoof back in the game, I'm gonna...
Crusader Kings 3. A game with just the right amount of eugenics and familicide to make you think, no, this isn't weird. It's just something I need to do to strengthen my empire. Hello everyone, I am the Ottawa Welshman and here to tell you my thoughts on the current state of CK3. Back on release, this game was pretty bare bones. Fun, don't get me wrong, but bare bones. And like Pavlov's dog, every March, June, and September, we all start salivating for more content. And it does feel like with these DLCs, Paradox is really listening to the community and improving the game simultaneously. We saw this with the introduction of plagues and unlanded characters. Great examples of what the community wants being put into the game. Now, like any good Ottawan, last year I took a 7-month break to hibernate and eat nothing but shawarma poutine and Tim Hortons. And when I finally did come back to the game, I was actually shocked to find out that I had so many new playthrough ideas with all the stuff they had added. It really makes me feel hopeful, knowing that any time in the future I can put this away and come back to it, and count on it to take up an entire weekend of my free time. I think their model of a slow release to gradually build on a bare bones game is awesome. Now, if they can just finally put out a console update update some new start dates, and introduce trade, I think we would be one of the happiest Paradox communities out there. Thanks, Andy.
Crusader Kings 3 is just as much about personal intrigue as it is about world conquest, as occupied with culture as it is with religion, taking you all the way from the 9th to the 15th century. Of course, whereas other Paradox grand strategy games first and foremost deal with the management of the state, CK3 first and foremost focuses on people. This is what makes the Crusader Kings series so unique in strategy gaming, because rather than the state itself becoming personified by acting as an independent entity on the world stage, CK3 does away with this concept and treats his people as, well, people. It is the Holy Roman Emperor you need to be afraid of if you're playing as the King of France. It is the King of England that you wish to capture if you are invading the British Isles as William the Conqueror of Normandy, and it is the Pope himself you need to impress and cozy up to if you wish to improve your chances of survival within the Catholic world. Because here, every level of government, every army, every decision is made by characters, people in charge of these various aspects of governance. From the emperorship, to kings, dukes, counts, advisors in your court, prisoners in your jail cells, courtiers waiting for your favor, workers asking for employment, and even family members like spouses, siblings, and even children, all are people. Individuals with their very own titles, standings, coin purses, cultures, languages, religions, genetic makeup, and of course, personalities, traits, and skills. This is what makes this game so entirely unique, because not only does it change how you navigate a strategy game of this size and scope, but it changes the entirety of the events we're given, the gameplay that occurs while you're playing the game. Because at the end of the day, CK3 is all about its people. And that doesn't only make this series wholly unique, but also that much more immersive, since Byzantium and every other state is now no longer run by a faceless coat of arms, but an actual emperor with a history and their own motivations. The only other Paradox game series that do something remotely similar is Imperator Rome, the fantastic game taking place in antiquity, where people also very much make up a large part of gameplay by mixing aspects of governance with character relations. Of course, every Paradox game to some extent include characters in top positions, but I think you know what I mean. EU Force Advisors or Hearts of Iron Force Ministers do not really convey personality in the same way, and they don't take up nearly as much space or harbor as prominent roles as the one in Crusader Kings 3. Because when you begin this game, the choice of where you wish to begin playing is as much about where you want to play as who you want to play. There will always be power imbalances, of course, but that's not just an occurrence in CK3, not just a feature, but an integral core aspect. Because like I mentioned, unlike in say EU4, where you pick a state and roll with it, and you expand your state by literally expanding your borders, eating your neighbors, and truly being the only entity in your realm at any point, Crusader Kings 3 is by its game design definition multi-layered. Unlanded courtiers, knights, counts, dukes, kings, and even emperors can all exist at the same time under the banner of say the Holy Roman Empire, or Byzantium, or the Abbasid Caliphate, or any other empire tier, kingdom tier, duchy tier, or county tier title. All of this is possible due to Crusader Kings 3's ranking system, which necessitates that within the same realm, one person with a landed title is always either the overlord or the subordinate of a lower or higher ranked member. They can of course also be relatively equal to others. For example, if you rule a kingdom, you're bound to have several dukes beneath you, and potentially countless more counts underneath those, with higher rank levels in theory bringing newfound power and influence with them. But part of the fun of Crusader Kings 3 is the fact that you can use this asymmetry in other ways, because nobody says that you have to begin as a king or an emperor, which is the de facto starting rank you play in every other strategy game. No, you can in fact begin as a subject of a more powerful lord, and have part of the fun of this campaign be that you manage to carve out your own realm, or indeed usurp the title of your liege or other title holders entirely. In many ways, Crusader Kings 3 is about the people rather than the states, about asymmetrical titles and their de jure territory rather than simple territorial conquest. Of course, with Roads to Power came the ability to play as unlanded characters too, people holding no titles but who are able to influence the game in other ways, whether by controlling massive mercenary armies or be political intrigue characters in various situations. You might become landed at some point though, and so it's possible to go from being a literal nobody to being a powerful title holder. And even though this is a massive and unique aspect of CK3, which truly does set it apart from most strategy games out there, it is the characters behind these titles that makes for the most fun. You see, even though there are thousands of characters in CK3 at any given point, you're always, no matter your rank or standing, always playing just one character. Just the one, and that person is the personification of you, your hopes, your dreams, and your ambitions. But just like in real life, there are certain things you can't change. Influence them you can, but fully change? That depends. You see, your character is a product of everything going on around them. Their upbringing in life, their parents' genetics and their guardians' teachings, their relationship with friends, lovers, or even haters, important events that shape their views on life, and of course, their own standing in the realm. All of these factors influence your character's personality, whether they are shy or arrogant, brave or cowardly, depressed or happy, strong or weak, healthy or sickly, ambitious or content, and every single one of these personality traits determine who they are, determine who you are, how they view other people in and outside of their domain, and how they are likely to act and react both now and in the future. Your character will be born with certain inclinations, more likely perhaps to be a better statesman than a fighter, or perhaps a better assassin than diplomat, but you are able to influence your skills and even personality traits through your actions. For example, going on a pilgrimage will give you a newfound sense of purpose in life, or celebrating a grand wedding might alleviate the stress you've accumulated over the past months and years. Forming closer bonds with your wife or spouse, of whatever kind, might make them your soulmate, giving you a lifelong friend you can trust no matter what. Accomplishing great feats in your life, such as uniting kingdoms as with the great Harald Fairhair of Norway, may provide entirely new nicknames and increase your base stats for the rest of your life. Depending on your focus at various stages of your life, which is essentially CK3's character leveling system, you can even vastly improve yourself in the aspects you choose, be it statesmanship, warfare, diplomacy, health, science, and more. Now, while you can create a jack-of-all-trades character if you wish, making them good at raiding here, teaching them to actually wash their hands over there, and making them a gentleman lover at the same time, I think you do well to focus on certain focus trees at least to an extent, since accumulating the associated skills and traits do lend you powerful ancillaries at the end of your journey. Depending on your focus, you can even decide to tackle hardships in different ways. Because yes, even though the medieval period is a lot of fun and games, CK3's is a world of both enjoyment and hardship. Dealing with stress and loss is a real thing in this game, as stress levels influence your ability to rule and live soundly. Secluding yourself in meditation, going on hunts with the girls, or even partying your worries away are true solutions to your problems depending on what kind of character you are. It's fantastic how many personalities CK3 offers here, and equally, how many solutions to problems actually exist. But just like in real life, these solutions aren't always obvious. In fact, there might even be a solution ready when you need it, but events often occur that impact you in various ways. The thing about CK3 though, is that even though you're very much able to carve your own path and forge your own destiny through determined action, almost every aspect of this game is to some extent based on chance and the randomness of life. But the game almost always tells you what your chances are or where you are standing when giving you a choice, allowing you to make more or less informed decisions, and then deal with the fallout. While moments like a character's death can technically happen at any point, even this is more or less foreseeable through the health modifier, allowing you to alter or influence it as far as you can to not necessarily prevent death, but at least prolong your life in terms of natural causes. And this hints at the integral core of Crusader Kings 3's concept, namely the family, and the literal embodiment of the phrase, "The king is dead, long live the king." Because when you die, when your character's life is over, that's not the end of the game. Unlike when your state is gone in EU or Hearts of Iron and your game ends, you continue your legacy through your primary heir in Crusader Kings, which as a rule is your eldest child. You see, when a man and a woman meet to forge an alliance between realms and perhaps love each other very much, they produce heirs, heirs through which dynasties are continued. And dynasty is the key word here, because it is through the dynasty, your dynasty, that your game continues, that you make your mark on the world and shape your legacy. Because at the end of the day, for all the madness and epic moments, Crusader Kings 3 is a game about competing dynasties and how they navigate a world of countless other dynasties in medieval battle royale. Your congenital traits, meaning traits that have a chance to be passed on, combined with those of your spouse, might continue down the bloodline if fortune is on your side. And who knows, a few centuries down the line, you might have a carefully bred king or emperor or empress who's the most genius you ever saw. Now, thinking of breeding rulers is of course rather weird and wacky, but CK3 is weird and wacky, and it's not even unrealistic and mimics the medieval world rather well actually. Just as in history, CK3 is mostly about two things when it comes down to it: marrying well and having babies. But after that, the marriage part becomes important, because the question isn't just about who you're marrying, but why you're marrying. Are you marrying for good genes in order to create a dynasty of supermen to control the world later on? Or are you marrying for land and wealth, clawing as much material goodness as you can before death comes knocking? This last part is especially important, because even though Crusader Kings is in many ways about expanding your realm and becoming the most powerful force in the world, the way you go about it differs from most if not all grand strategy games out there. There are several ways of going about conquering your neighbors after all, and while it might be a long-term investment, marriage is in fact a great way to do so. Let's say you marry the daughter of a foreign ruler, binding your dynasties together. While you will form an alliance in the short term, your new wife's father will at some point die, God rest his soul, giving her a claim to the titles he held, even though they might have officially gone to his eldest son, your wife's older brother. This means that your wife is now a claimant, giving her, and by extension you, a casus belli, a reason for war. Acting on such a casus belli will see you contest a new king for your wife's stolen birthright, of course. But what happens next is going to be like nothing you've ever experienced. Because since Crusader Kings 3 is all about people and their titles, a victory in such a war will not give you the land, but rather your wife, whose claim you are backing, gets the crown and any other possible contested titles. By extension, we're now in a situation where your wife, who used to be your domestic queen consort, is now both your queen consort and also the actual queen of her own country. This of course brings with it its own challenges. Like for example, what if there is a rebellion against your wife's reign, or perhaps a foreign invasion by a major power? Will you answer the call and defend her with your own troops, risking your own kingdom's safety? You automatically have an alliance with your wife if she's made queen, so it will significantly damage your fame and prestige if you don't accept her plea. On the upside, you get a new potentially powerful ally and, most importantly, any primary offspring you might have, as long as you married paternally, meaning any child is of your dynasty, and you better have an offspring by the way since you fought for this woman, will inherit both your wife's and your own highest ranking titles, meaning that while the two kingdoms you both rule are formally separated as of now, when it's time to yell the king and queen are dead, long live the king and queen, your new character will suddenly be in control of two entire kingdoms instead of one. In other words, marriage can be a fantastic and medium to long-term path to domination, but it of course necessitates that you are powerful enough to back up your spouse's claim. In other words, marriage is a great way to do so, and one of the most fun, since this is when you truly feel that sense of long-term planning and strategy that only Crusader Kings 3 does in this way. Of course, personal claims is another way to go about it. Claims is for all intents and purposes the lifeblood of CK3 conquest, since it is through reasons for war that you may attack someone at all. Now, casus belli come in many different sizes, but claims, namely your perceived right to a specific title and the land that comes with that title, is arguably the primary one. Claims can be attained through many paths, the most common being inheritance from your parents, but you can also order an advisor to forge claims to a specific title, or if you have a vassal, a subject in your realm. You may press their claim on a foreign title, and if that title is lower in rank than your current title, that land will become part of your kingdom, although not your personal holding. There are more ways to achieve claims on titles like these, as through random lucky events for example, or through chains of events. But one of the last ways to expand your realm is through either cultural or personal traits. You see, using that lifestyle leveling system is vital, and if you wish to do some conquering, going a certain length on the diplomacy and diplomat tree will provide you with the ducal conquest and forced vassalage casus belli, meaning you'll get many more chances at attacking your neighbors for various reasons than just specific titles. But like I said, specific cultures provide you more ways of going on the offensive, because while you need some sort of established claim, either through personal claims or other casus belli, as a tribal Viking culture for example, you have free reign to invade your neighbors through border wars and generic county or duchy claims, solidifying your rule territory by territory. You can even make use of specialized reasons like moving your entire realm to your desired destination through Varangian conquests, or make use of invasions. And while they are not wars per se, Vikings can even go on raids, pillaging foreign lands by sending armies to take their gold, as long as you can survive a fight or get away in time, that is. This means that if you do manage to establish a mighty Viking realm and remain a tribal government instead of going feudal or clan, you can actually deal some insane damage as a pillaging Viking horde and get extremely wealthy in no time, since what usually holds the hordes back is their relative weakness to the larger established feudal and clan kingdoms. And of course, surprise surprise, we have the Holy Wars, not least of all the titular Crusades, which sends the willing participants to wage war against the target kingdom. However, Crusades aren't really for your personal benefit in terms of land, not initially anyway. Great Holy Wars like Crusades in fact sees you choose a beneficiary should you contribute most of your alliance's power, giving you gold and traits if you participate and win, sure, but giving a dynasty member the actual titles of the Crusade target. This doesn't necessarily benefit you extremely in the short term, but in the long term, it gives your family, your dynasty, more renown over time since more of you now hold kingdom tier titles, while also giving you an easy path to an alliance with the newfound kingdom. Of course, this is also a risk. Crusader states are often weak in their first years, surrounded by powerful adversaries, and you don't necessarily last long. Alternatively, a really cool feature of Crusades is that you can actually use them to completely change your playthrough. Instead of continuing on in your current realm, you can leave and become the new king or queen of the Crusade target. For example, leaving your home European country and become the new king of Jerusalem or the Crusader state in question by taking on the role of the dynasty member you assign to be your beneficiary. But the renown part is important, since CK3 offers a system known as dynasty legacies. Legacies are essentially massive boons unique to your dynasty, at least unique in the sense that every dynasty can choose their own path out of a selection of options. Legacies won't necessarily change the way you play the game right away, but they will help you direct your efforts over time and bring various parts of the game together in new ways. Legacies allow your dynasty to become known as a particular group of people, say renowned warriors who are inherently better at combat and fighting. Perhaps you love to hold parties and gather folks around you, meaning the activities line might be fitting, as it halves the cost of grand weddings and allows for more opportunities during festivals. Perhaps you're something of a family person, using the blood legacy to increase the chances of your children inheriting good traits, or indeed expand their life expectancy. Perhaps you value a vibrant court and country, using the customs legacy to learn more languages easier and make friends with foreign rulers and vassals of minority cultures. Or indeed, perhaps you care about the renown of your bloodline itself and use the bloodline legacy to increase the power and reach of your dynasty legends to create stories that last throughout the ages. In many ways, Legacies is playing the long game. After all, the renown resource accumulates rather slowly, and the more legacies you open up, the longer it takes to unlock the next one. It's a great system that for the most part lurks in the background, but which feels all the sweeter when you finally get to unlock a new beautifully painted tile. And it's awesome that you can actually mix and match parts of every legacy with each other, meaning you don't have to commit to just one line of legacies if you don't want to. Remember though, that the further into a legacy you make it, the more powerful the boons become, so you better make sure that you invest in the right legacies. In addition, only the dynasty head may unlock legacies for the dynasty, meaning that if you're not the most powerful character in your dynasty, this feature is off limits for your tampering until you prove yourself worthy. However, if you are not third in line or closer to be the dynasty head, you might consider creating a cadet branch, which is essentially an offshoot of the main one, but where you get to be the leader and control your own legacy. In other words, depending on your personal traits and circumstances, those of your families or vassals, your culture, or even religion, there are so many ways to expand your realm. But of course, not every possible avenue will be open at any time, but must usually be sought out or enabled in some other way, or by virtue of your character's traits. I'll admit that in the beginning, it's probably going to be difficult to make progress here, depending on your character. I mean, after all, it is a paradox game we're playing here, so you'll probably have a relatively hard time regardless to get your bearings. But still, I find the multitude of paths to conquest, at least when you know where to look, to be refreshing, particularly in comparison to many other strategy games where conquest is just a matter of clicking the attack button. Consider also the fact that whenever a war is fought, only the claim from one side is pressed at any time. This means that contrary to other paradox games, if you've been invaded, you can't really counter-invade in the same war. You can blanket occupy the enemy's land, sure, but all you get once the war is over is prestige, some cash money, and the knowledge that your lands are safe for now. However, the attacker, no matter whether it's you or the AI, will receive a truce cooldown that lasts a few years, meaning that unless they wish to incur heavy personal penalties, the attacker cannot attack you again until the truce is over. But you as a defender do not have this truce, and are in theory, if you have the right claim and see your now vanquished foe with a tiny army and a dwindling war chest, free to counterattack after the first war is over. Now this does sound strange coming from quite literally any other strategy game out there, where the logic is that war is war, and if you can occupy it, you can take it. But remember how CK3 practically runs on claims? That's also the case here. And while I think you should perhaps automatically get a border war claim casus belli, or a revenge casus belli, or something else of that sort, I think CK3's logic is rather sound. There is so much going on in this game already that adding on the possibility of losing land in an offensive war would probably make the border gore even crazier. Another thing to consider is that depending on your kingdom's laws and your crown authority, your own vassals have minds of their own and are by default allowed to wage war both internally, but importantly, against external enemies. If a vassal duke who made up a large part of your kingdom could suddenly attack a foreign state, but lose the war and their own land in the process, that would probably not be ideal for you, the king, who did nothing to provoke this theoretical foreign army. As it stands, that would likely introduce a lot more headaches than the player wants. However, I think there is a way to fix it, and to make CK3 a lot more dynamic at the same time. Imagine, if you will, that a vassal of yours, or indeed you yourself as a vassal, attacks a foreign entity. Now, since the entity is foreign, you can't simply attack the duke holding your specific title. You actually have to attack the entire kingdom, since the duke holding your title is after all under the protection of their king. Now say you're losing that offensive war, and the enemy army stands at your gates. Imagine now a diplomatic revamp, where instead of simply having the foreign army invade your lands to remove you or your vassal, that the foreign king presented you with options. Either A, join him in attacking your vassal to end the current, let's call it, illegitimate war and resulting in peace, pay reparations to the foreign king, which would spare your lands from pillaging and lead to peace, and you could perhaps even strip your vassal of their title and send them in chains to the foreign king. C, offer your vassal's titles and lands to the foreign king in exchange for peace. Or D, join your vassal's war and defend them against the incoming invasion force who are now coming for your land. I find that these options, which would fit greatly into CK3's already existing event and dialogue system, where skills and power put weights on the scales, could potentially lead to a more dynamic gameplay, and gameplay which made going on offensive wars a lot more risky, and indeed making defensive wars themselves a lot more fun, with possible great rewards down the line. Let me know what you think of these ideas, or if you think CK3's system works just fine as it is. What makes Crusader Kings 3 more than just a Warriors game though, is the fact that the opportunities for intrigue, scheming, and personal relationships are so many and so vital. Because don't think for a second that you're safe at the top. In fact, there's theoretically no other place where you're the most unsafe. You see, the characters of CK3 can scheme against each other. Now, scheming isn't actually an inherently bad thing. You can scheme to befriend someone, to bed someone, to have someone else help you learn their language, or other non-murder activities. But the murder activities are fun, aren't they? And they are indeed a great way to remove powerful adversaries that stand in your way for whatever reason. Be it for a title, that girl you want to marry, or perhaps they're lousy at their job, and you need them removed without a trace. Schemes are never automatically successful. You need to wait a time before they're finished, and your skill at that particular type of scheme will determine how successful you are, if at all. But the thing is, since you can scheme to assassinate your rivals, so too can your rivals scheme to assassinate you. In fact, if you're hated by enough people, they can all band together and raise the chances that they be successful. Now, being murdered is rarely fun. It's certain to derail your plans, and depending on your succession laws or the age of your heir, your new character is going to face a ton of challenges, not least of all an emboldened group of vassals wanting more power in the realm. A successful schemer can theoretically exterminate entire families, or if you're more of a lover, breed their way through families, making sure that prima nocta isn't just a Braveheart thing, but actually cementing your dynasty around the world faster than you could ever imagine. Virtually anyone is open to be schemed against, and by using your skills and the limits of what the game offers you, it's possible to do some incredibly crazy stuff as a professional schemer, as proven by YouTubers like Snap Strategy. What you cannot do though, at least directly, is conspire to assassinate your children. This is for some reason impossible in CK3, but was possible in CK2, and I lament that you now have to take extra steps to do so, like leaving them in harm's way whenever you can, or jailing them against a tyranny penalty, or other things of that nature. Because having kids is all well and good, as long as it secures your dynasty and continued rule. But having too many kids, in fact, having more than one heir, can be a headache for any would-be ruler. This brings us to the intricate governing systems of CK3, systems that inform everything you do and shape the world around you. Every kingdom, no matter your circumstances, adhere to certain playbooks, like crown authority, whether you're a tribal, clan, or feudal state, and your succession laws. Feudal states tend to be Christian, while Muslims tend to be clan, for example, with the difference being that feudal states have a formal ruler-vassal contract which determines their obligations and rights to each other, while clan rule is a bit looser, while also focusing on the relationships within the clan. These are the basic fundamental rule sets within your realm, and while crown authority determines things like whether a ruler can jail their vassals or legally strip them of titles if they have cause to, because yes, even the ruler must adhere to the laws of the land, succession laws determine who gets what when the old king is no more. And you see, most of us probably assumes that succession is handled in this way. Your eldest son is made king and inherits everything you own, allowing the lineage to continue in peace. Now that's just a nice little idea, isn't it? But sadly, that's not the reality at all for the first few hundred years. You see, for most of the early Middle Ages, what in CK2 was known as gavelkind, but which in CK3 has the more simple categorization of partition succession, is effectively the most common and in fact only available succession type in the early game for many characters. And contrary to primogeniture, which is the succession type we all desperately pray to God for, partition succession divides your held titles between every single one of your heirs, even though your primary heir will also receive the highest title you own, for example the kingdom title. This means that every time you die, and you have more than one heir, your titles will split up time and time again, and you'll have to use your skills to reunite them. The good part is that technically, your primary heir should be the most powerful by default. And second, every heir will be claimants to every other title that they lost out on. Meaning if you have the power base for it, you can retake your siblings' lands fairly quickly if you put your mind to it. But the real danger is if you control multiple titles of the same rank. Say for example that you are a king holding several kingdom titles. When your character dies, your primary heir will once more receive your primary kingdom title. But the other kingdom title and its corresponding subjects will part ways with you and now belong to your brother, depending on whether girls can inherit or not, which is also another succession law, by the way. This is essentially what happened to Charlemagne's great Frankish Empire. The only reason it split when it did was because the kingdoms within said empire was given to his various children, resulting in centuries or even millennia of war and rivalry, depending on how you look at it. In other words, you mustn't just beware of rivals both foreign and domestic when considering the security of your realm, but also what will happen after you die, because sometimes the ones closest to you are your most dangerous enemies. In clan states mostly ruled by Muslims, house unity is what determines succession, and the more unified the house is, the more titles your primary heir will inherit on monarch death. While it is more unpredictable, house unity is also a lot more dynamic, as it changes over time based on your actions to either unify or divide your house, and feels very different from the feudal way of doing things, which can be a lot of fun if you're getting too familiar one way or the other. But even though you can see the other succession laws and might want to switch to them, there is a certain little thing known by the name of innovations that'll stop you from doing so, no matter whether all of the other boxes are ticked. You see, in the background of CK3 runs a system of cultural innovations, a system which essentially tracks and evolves over time, and determines how far along the lines of history your culture in particular has come. In fact, to be able to enact primogeniture partition, which sees your primary heir gain all titles regardless of how many children you have, you must have made it to the late Middle Ages, starting in 1200 AD at the earliest. And even that's not enough, because you must even have researched the very idea of primogeniture laws at that. In other words, think carefully about how you manage your children, or whether it's better to just, go celibate after that first one. But other than for just succession laws, innovations have massive consequences in CK3, since it essentially is the equivalent of a technology tree. Innovations are tied to eras in the game, eras which are not just unlocked as you reach a certain year, but locked by governing type like tribal and feudal, and by how many of the earlier eras innovations you've already unlocked. While the later innovations are arguably more powerful, each era's innovations are important in keeping up with the technology race, since even the most basic innovations unlock new buildings, new casus belli, units, abilities, and much more. I think innovations is a great way to deal with technology rather than just calling it technology, since technology never truly seems time appropriate as a concept. The symbol for each innovation is beautifully drawn at that, and if there's one thing CK3 needs to be commended for in terms of its UI, it's definitely the concept art, adorned as every innovation is with detailed and appropriate drawings. I also very much like the way innovations are acquired, because actually unlocking innovations is another matter entirely, and is tied to a multitude of factors. You see, innovations increase based on factors like the average development level of every county belonging to your culture, whether you border a culture who's already unlocked said innovation, and whether the innovation is currently the target of your culture's fascination, meaning that you specifically focus on adopting the innovation in question. Because every innovation has a certain chance of increasing its progress every month, but only the cultural fascination has a true boost to this progress. If you really wish to increase your innovation adoption faster than everyone else, you'll do well then to not just increase the average development in your realm, which we'll get back to, but to also seek out other ways of doing so, like say, choosing the scholar lifestyle and unlocking scientific, which increases your cultural fascination progress by a crazy 20%. All in all, I think cultural fascinations and innovations are great systems. I love the way they portray the slow but steady path from the early medieval era to the later stages of this time period. But even so, the fact that you can focus on increasing the speed at which progress is increasing is genius, allowing for playstyles that can see your culture become a powerhouse of innovation. Of course, closely connected with innovations is what we touched upon before, namely the development of your realm. And wherever there's a title, there is land to go with it. In CK3, development is integral to your realm, not only affecting your innovations gain, but each level of development determines how much taxes you gain, how many levies you can draw from the county, and how many troops you can station in the location without incurring attrition penalties. How quickly you gain development, however, is determined by a multitude of factors, like your innovations, investments in that particular county, the efforts of advisors to raise the development level, and event chains that also increase it. Now, while I do enjoy the development system on its own, it's nowhere near as great as the development system in a game like Imperator Rome, where development in that game, essentially known as civilization, can essentially be chalked up to a combination of the buildings present in the province and the amount of people in it, i.e. the pops, where various peoples of different social status, cultures, and religions are present. And that's not even mentioning that CK3 doesn't really have a trade or resource system at all, meaning some of the most basic and fundamental pastimes of peacetime are not present. Honestly, the lack of a proper population and trade system is probably what irks me the most about CK3, since I find that a ton of depth and immersion is lost because of it. All you have to do really is look to either Imperator or Victoria 3 to understand how fun and deep proper pop and trading mechanic can be, to see how even a simplified version for CK3 could change that entire game, and make peaceful and tall playthroughs just as fun as the world domination ones. That being said, I think development works fine in CK3, but that it definitely could be a lot better. But just as important as development are the buildings in a county, and just like with development, I have to say that I find the building system to be rather subpar. But again, not necessarily bad on its own. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Crusader Kings 3's counties offer a number of building slots depending on factors like innovations, whether the county has a potential special building, or whether it's the duchy capital in a duchy. Further, the buildings available to you is dependent on whether the city is close to the sea, which enables trading ports, or whether they're placed on farmland, which enables the powerful farm building, which provides a ton of money. Duchy buildings provide especially powerful generic buildings that are vital to keep within your power, and special buildings allow for historical buildings to be constructed, from the Stav churches of Norway and the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. I like how CK3 offers in total a rather numerous amount of buildings when all is said and done, and I especially love the unique historical ones, which does provide many boons to the owner. It's also great how building and developing your land actually makes it feel like you're creating that important progress, even though it can take time if you don't invest your money into your development. It's also cool that tribal kingdoms have much smaller cities compared to more advanced feudal ones, since it accentuates the difference between a more rowdy and more stationary and developed type of realm. With that being said, I'm not really a fan of the ultra-limited number of building slots, as I really like a certain sense of freedom when investing in my cities. Second, if populations and proper resources weren't enough to be missing, a big lack in CK3 is the non-existent city sprawl. Because there is something truly weird about how CK3's map, which otherwise looks beautiful by the way, just doesn't seem to evolve or change with the times. Compare this system to the absolutely gorgeous cities of Imperator Rome, which stretch across the map more and more as time goes by. Or indeed the cities of Victoria 3, which do the same, creating a living map that truly feels like it. Seeing as CK3 is built on the same engine as Imperator and Victoria, it baffles me that such a system hasn't been made yet, since it is such a visual feast that really makes an immersive change in the long run, and especially across campaigns, where the world might look different between playthroughs, especially because cities from different cultures would alter the map differently. To help you manage your realm though, you have advisors on your council, a hand-picked selection of characters from your realm who occupy various positions of the government. Now the council itself doesn't really have any voting power or direct say in matters of state. That was a feature of CK2 though, one that came with the Conclave DLC, which ended up being my favorite expansion to that game. And it's sad that CK3 still doesn't have a council system that's as crucial to pay attention to as that one. But that doesn't mean it's not fun to deal with or important. Each position on the council governs a different part of society, meaning that your chancellor, whose effectiveness is increased by higher diplomacy skill, can among other things help increase relations between you and important domestic or foreign actors. Your marshal helps train your soldiers depending on the order and has the important job of increasing control in a county, which effectively determines the order and tax collection in the county. Your steward helps increase development of your tax base and can even promote your culture or the acceptance between you and another culture. Your queen or consort adds their particular skill of your choosing to your total of the same skill, allowing you to be better at whatever area you choose. Your high bishop can increase religious relations, convert the faith of others, or importantly, fabricate a claim on a foreign county, which allows you to wage a legitimate war. And last but not least, your spy master is in charge of keeping you and your family safe, uncovering plots against you in your realm, or indeed helping you to further a plot of your own. The spy master is particularly vital here though, because even though their job is prolonging your life, they also have unprecedented access to you, meaning that if your spy master dislikes you, or have claims against you, or have any other major reason to act against you, they might just end up being your downfall, as it's not unheard of that they join hostile plots against you instead of foiling them. As a rule, there are generally two things you want from an advisor. The first is the highest possible skill that corresponds with the respective office. In other words, to make them the most effective at their job. You see, more often than not, an advisor with a high skill won't just do their job better, but actually have random positive events happen, while the opposite is true for those with average to low skills. Second is that you want an advisor who likes you so they won't backstab or otherwise sabotage your rule. Those are two fairly simple rules, but it's actually not that easy. You see, as your realm grows, your vassals will become more powerful too, and they will demand more power and important roles within the kingdom. These powerful vassals will be outraged if they're not placed on the council, so you probably should do so to avoid a civil war or an uprising. But this leads us to another question. What happens when the powerful vassal, who can potentially threaten your rule, isn't the best person for the job? Well, this is when you get to choose what's most important to you. Keeping your ideal meritocracy of right man for the right job, or do you take political realities into consideration and hire the underperforming but powerful vassal instead? And what happens when you have so many powerful vassals who all want a spot, but there's no more room on the council? These are all questions you'll have to ask yourself as you go. And of course, if you happen to be the vassal of a liege lord, you get to be the one demanding a seat on their council, receiving the salary and benefits that come with it, if you have a seat of course. Spy masters and angry vassals aren't just a risk because they might be out to kill you if they dislike you enough of course, because CK3 also offers internal factions. Factions are what forms when enough people are disillusioned with your rule, and if they reach a large enough power base in the kingdom to threaten it, they will send you an ultimatum which, if declined, will result in immediate civil war. factions can be formed to demand a variety of concessions, like lower crown authority, different succession laws, or indeed the right of another claimant to rule the land. But perhaps the most common one is the independence faction, which would, if successful, render its belligerents independent of your kingdom, severely diminishing your power. It's therefore wise to, as often as possible, keep your most powerful vassals happy, or perhaps even allying with them, or in other ways keep them from joining factions entirely. One way of doing this is through CK3's hook system. Hooks are essentially representative of the sway you have over other characters and vice versa. Hooks can be gained by doing favors or indeed keeping other people's secrets, and a hook is therefore a favor of sorts in itself that they return to you, or vice versa. Hooks can be used to force people to give you gold, to not join factions against you, or in other ways persuade or demand they do things they otherwise wouldn't, like accept a less beneficial vassal contract on their part. Since hooks go both ways though, I rarely accept outcomes where other characters receive hooks on me, since if they press the hook, I'll have no choice but to accept. Of course, sometimes the hook is worth it, and you never know if or when it will be pressed for what reasons, so it's always a mind game and a risk really, a risk which you'll have to weigh up against the potential positives. Similarly to council members but generally not as vitally important, are your courtier positions. Courtiers, which are unlanded characters within your kingdom, may hold ceremonial or practical positions in your realm, such as court physician, food taster, antiquarian, master of the horse, royal architect, and so on. In fact, there is a host of positions now, and I love how expanded this section of the game has become. And while not directly tied to the levers of power like the council is, they very much do have an impact on the well-being of your realm, allowing the courtiers to improve whatever area they work in, give them a salary, and improved opinions of you. And they can even very much help you personally, like when a physician treats your wounds or a tutor helps your children learn new things. Of course, you have positions like food taster, which again, quite like the spy master, you better give to someone who likes you, since they might end up poisoning your food rather than tasting for poison. And while courtiers can be chosen at random with no real threat to your rule, you do well to consider their level of aptitude. Aptitude determines how well suited they are for the job in terms of performance, so the bigger your court, or the more attractive it is to foreigners, the better your chances are of having a selection of characters that will serve you well. And I think it's important for the game that features like the council and the court actually has you make use of and interact with characters on a friendly and administrative level too, as they also open up for a lot of interesting event chains. One of my favorite features of Paradox games, and CK3 is certainly no different here, is the enactment of decisions, and in particular the major ones. For while regular decisions allow you to say, search for a physician to keep your court healthy, or invite champions to become knights in your army, major decisions are where CK3 allows you to truly change the world, or perhaps just have a damn good time. They allow you to found a completely new empire if conditions allow you to dismantle the papacy if you're non-Catholic, adopt feudalism, found Viking holy orders, and bring historical empires back to life through your own conquests. Major decisions vary greatly from country to country, culture to culture, and religion to religion, and when a new one pops up or a certain faction allows for a unique set of decisions you've never seen before, well, that's when my butterflies start to fly around in the old belly, and I'm really glad that CK3 is keeping this particular Paradox tradition alive. A main component of CK3 is culture, whether we're talking about which culture our characters belong to, which determine their opinion of other people, if we're talking innovations, where culture can lend you some unique ones only available to you and your people, or indeed to the very traits of the cultures themselves, and it's this last part that intrigues me. You see, CK3 has managed to make culture so much more than just a static label. It is in fact impactful and dynamic. Each culture is inherently different from others, whether slightly or significantly so, by virtue of their ethos, cultural pillars, and traditions. First of all, a cultural ethos is essentially the overarching notion of what your culture is about, and what it values in a character. For the Norse Vikings, for example, the Norse cultural ethos is bellicose, meaning warlike and aggressive, lending their characters better fighting skills, larger levies, and cheaper men-at-arms. This differs from, say, the French culture, which is ceremonious, focusing more on prestige and opinion of your royal house members and court. Greek culture, which is bureaucratic, focusing on increased lifestyle, cultural fascination and development progress, or Kurdish, which is communal, raising the opinions of close family members and lowering the cost of same culture mercenaries, building times and building costs. None of these cultural ethos makeups will make or break a character, but they do influence them enough to make a difference, especially if you truly know when to make use of them. Cultural pillars, on the other hand, represent the harder aspects of a culture, like language, attire and dress, names, and whether only men, only women, or both sexes may lead armies in battle. On the other hand, cultural traditions are what we might look at as the more traditional ways of viewing culture, like customs, political systems, and ways of being. And this is my favorite part of CK3's culture system, not least of all because of the amazing artwork and their corresponding traits. Again, for the Norse, the Ting meat allows for the unique Scandinavian elective succession law. Coastal warriors provides a unique set of men-at-arms for recruitment while also making certain traits more common and desirable. Performative honor allows women to hold battlefield positions even though the gender laws technically prohibit it. And Northern Stories allows Norse people to raise rune stones in honor of their ancestors and makes the poet trait more common and even better than it usually is. This stands in contrast to, again, the Greek culture with legalistic, making just a more common and valuable trait, Eastern Roman legacy, which significantly decreases peasant levy size, but actually drastically increases your capability to recruit men-at-arms and keep a standing army, and formation fighting experts, which increases the effectiveness of infantry units while lowering it for light cavalry and skirmisher units, symbolizing the Greek and Byzantine use of tighter and heavier Roman formations. And lastly, the Kurdish culture's sword for fire tradition makes the use of mercenaries a lot more viable by lowering their cost and increasing their prevalence. Mountain homes increases development growth in mountains, lowers the danger of travel in mountains, and lowers the cost of constructing buildings in mountainous regions. Eye for an eye values revenge instead of forgiveness, making the vengeful trait more common and seen as positive, and increases the likelihood of rivalries between characters, while fierce independence increases same culture opinion, increases your defensive capabilities in controlled regions, and more. In other words, traditions are the true game changers of CK3's culture system and brings a ton of added flavor to the game. I really love it actually, and find that unique traits like these, accompanied by great artwork and believable and historical authenticity, is key to immersion in a game like this. But what's perhaps even more awesome, and frankly crucial in a strategy RPG like this, is the ability to alter or even change your culture. For while, yes, you can in fact adopt a completely different culture if the conditions are met, say if you become the vassal of a foreign ruler, or importantly, if you choose to either reform or diverge from your culture. Of course, if all talk of cultural exchange, religious goodwill and diplomatic marriages fail, or indeed succeed, you might be faced with war, or rather force others to do so. Warfare is an integral part of Crusader Kings 3, since, well, you can't really have crusades without the war, can you now? And no, the Children's Crusade doesn't count. We've talked about important aspects of war before, like claims and casus belli, but not the act of war itself, which is going to be quite familiar if you've played other Paradox games, but probably not so much if you haven't, since CK3 uses a different approach to armies than your average strategy game. First of all, CK3 makes a big distinction between levies, men-at-arms, and knights for that ultimate medieval immersion. Levies are your average run-of-the-mill peasant conscripts, who are levied from their land to fight your wars while they are happening. Levies are low-quality troops that can still be made better through innovations or certain buildings, which is also a way to get more levies, namely to build various types of barracks, but as a rule, they are the sponge of your army. You want a lot of them, but mostly so they can bear the brunt of an enemy force. Because the true strength of an army often lies in its use of the next tier of soldiers, namely the men-at-arms. These are soldiers which you specifically recruit and maintain through gold upkeep for feudal lords, or prestige for tribal ones, and the upkeep rises when they are actually raised during wartime. Men-at-arms come in a lot of different forms, from various types of spearmen, to bowmen, cavalry, heavily armored infantry, skirmishers, and even catapults and trebuchet siege artillery. All of these units have various costs associated with them, and you can only keep a certain amount of each in total, dependent on factors like your highest title rank. The reason why you'd want to recruit different men-at-arms though is because various strengths and weaknesses are given to one and all, like a unit being better at fighting in certain terrain or versus other units of a certain type and so on, meaning that depending on where you tend to fight or who your enemy is, you do well to analyze what their unit roster might look like and attempt to fight in favorable terrain for maximum advantage. After men-at-arms comes powerful knights, who are actually not recruited in the same way, but are chosen to position as knights, and are actually made up of real characters in your court. This is especially important, because this is where the rest of the CK3 experience merges with the warfare system. Because since knights are characters, they come with their own levels of prowess and martial skills, meaning that you do well to only enlist the best characters as your knights since, you guessed it, as with everything else, you only have a limited amount of space for knights at any given point, even though this limit will wax and wane depending on your current ruler rank and other factors. Now, if you have enough knights in your realm to just enlist them against a cost, lucky you, but if you don't, you may search for new knights via a decision. Knights are elite units of an army, and the more of them you have, the better. But remember that most mechanics in CK3 are tied to others. So for example, if you want even better levies, men-at-arms, and knights, you'd be wise to have a ruler focus on the martial lifestyle, because here there are various levels that significantly increases the fighting abilities of the various parts of your army. And of course, and speaking of yourself, no army is complete without a general leading it, because a general lends massive bonuses to their men. A general can be chosen from among suitable characters in your realm, normally people with high prowess skills, your martial advisor, or even yourself. Leading an army and winning battles is a vital way to gain traits and respect in your realm. But consider that the world of Crusader Kings 3 is dangerous, and just as in many other activities here, leading an army and fighting battles poses a big risk to your life. As always, your skills may deter death though. So if you're going to lead your own men once more into the fray, but hopefully not make it the last good fight you'll ever know, you're going to want to have a relatively high martial and prowess skill, since these govern the art of leading armies and personal combat respectively. There are more minute aspects of the warfare system in the background, and we'll look at even more when we talk about the DLCs. But I think CK3 does a fine job of making an intuitive system that works well and feels good. And it's a credit to the game design that so many parts come together from various parts of the game in such a real way on the battlefield. I would have liked if CK3 did even more with its battle animations though, since at this point, the only thing we're seeing are two soldiers fighting against each other, which is the classic Paradox way of doing things I guess, but I'd like something more spicy, especially since Wiki 3 recently showed the way forward on how cinematic and epic Paradox warfare actually can be. One thing I will say though in terms of mechanics is that in some ways, CK3's warfare system is a downgrade from other Paradox games, not least of all from its predecessor CK2. Because while I do appreciate the fact that armies can be raised quicker now and at various chosen spots in your realm, instead of having to be physically mustered and organized more or less manually from every county every single time, I do lament a few things. First of all, one of CK3's biggest shames is in my opinion the lack of naval combat, or standing navies in general. Navies are in CK3 magically appearing when you point your army overseas, as they will conjure a temporary navy against a cost of gold every time, instead of having a navy that you use to ferry troops where you want them. This didn't have to mean that there's no naval combat, since you could have a system where you determine what kind of ships your units received. But in effect, this is why there is no naval combat, because there are no warships on the oceans, there are only ferries. There's no way to stop a naval invasion, for example, there is no way to dominate your enemy as a naval power, and since there is no real trade system, there also isn't a merchant navy or anything of the sort, even in an era where literal maritime or merchant republics rose to power in Italy especially. No, the very idea of naval warfare is completely out the window, and I think it leaves an entire theater of gameplay in the shadows when it very much should be a part of the picture. Could it be added in a future DLC about merchant republics, since technically now, such republics aren't even playable? Well, maybe, but I think it's such a core aspect of a game that it would almost be too much of a hassle for Paradox to include it at this point in time, and perhaps they simply don't want to. But whatever the case, while it might not seem like a lot to a new player, or perhaps you don't even care about navies at all, I find that it neglects an aspect of grand strategy which is integral, something literally every other Paradox game like CK2 itself, the highly popular and navy-based EU4, Imperator Rome, Hearts of Iron 4, and the recent Victoria 3, all fantastic games in their own ways, understood. CK3's base game is so large at this point that there's bound to be things and details I haven't mentioned yet, and if there's anything you miss or think I've forgotten, then make sure to write me in the comments. What I want to talk about before journeying onward though is CK3's music and sound design. One of my absolute favorite aspects of a Paradox game is the accompanying soundtrack. More often than not, these tracks are composed by Andreas Valdetoft, or in more recent times, Håkon Glante, the former who composed the vast majority of Paradox music from Hearts of Iron 2 all the way back in 2005 to Crusader Kings 3 in 2020, and the latter who composed the DLC music for Imperator Rome after Jonathan Jarpehag did the main OST and the music for Victoria 3, all composers and music which I absolutely adore. I will say though that Valdetoft holds a particularly special place in my heart due to his simple god level of composing of tracks in EU4, Hearts of Iron and Stellaris, but simply beautiful are also the music in CK2 and the other games. With all that being said, ever since I began playing Paradox games from CK2 to Imperator and further, Paradox's soundtrack had a unique style. It was ever present, it was epic and melodic, and simply invaluable. It's music that I hum to, that I look up on YouTube as I'm writing this very video, because it's just that good to listen to, whether in-game or not. The problem with CK3's sound design when it comes to music isn't that the soundtrack itself is necessarily bad. I mean, if you listen to the OST, you'll find them highly melodic and often very powerful. But you won't have the same experience in-game, since instead of the melodic music being ever present, the original idea was that in CK3, the memorable music would be locked behind particular events, making them more special than they otherwise would be. You see, what dominates CK3's regular second-to-second gameplay are so-called mood tracks, ambient music that isn't meant to move you, but to rather essentially be elevator music, something that's there while you plot your way through the game, until an event shows up that kicks off a really powerful track that spices things up again. Personally, I find that this was a massive mistake. Since let's be real, an actually moving soundtrack is important to spark the imagination of the player in games that are mostly about rummaging through menus and UI windows. There are several distinct issues with this new design too. Often, the special melodic music will start when an event shows up, like say an activity like a party or a wedding, when a war breaks out, or say a crusade or anything of a certain magnitude. Then, one of three things will happen. 1. A cool track plays and it plays to completion, but is then gone and I'm back to hearing the same tune that literally sparks negativity in me. This track in particular. 2. A cool track plays, but is cut away from as you exit the event, meaning that both the track that was playing before the event and the cool track itself are both cut, which again results in not sparking joy. And 3. You actually like the mood track that is currently playing, but you are interrupted by the event music, an event theme you might not even particularly like either, like the nefarious tune of a spying event or something. All in all, while I do think some of the event tracks are cool, they do not make for a good listening experience. And for some reason, Paradox chose this route to take when the regular route of playing awesome music all the time has worked in literally every other game they've made. Now it should be noted that some of the mood tracks are good, and as soon as the first DLC, Paradox even took steps to create better and more engaging mood tracks that are more in line with the older ways of doing things, like with the Northern Lords tracks that are very melodic indeed, and I'm going to show you exactly what I mean, and I think you can tell the difference. Let's begin with the event tracks, which is music that in other Paradox games would be on constant rotation, which is how I prefer it, and I'll play every one of these example tracks for a maximum of 30 seconds, so please bear with me if you too love music and care about what goes into a Paradox soundtrack. Knights of Jerusalem, Charge of the Knights, the Dynasty, In Taberna Revisited. See how hyped that gets you? And yet, how you can just love them while they're playing? Well, compare and contrast these tunes to the so-called mood tracks that CK3 plays more often than not during regular gameplay when nothing of importance is happening. I give you Veni Vidi Vici, Dusking Sky Part 1, Dusking Sky Part 2. Did you notice the difference? While there certainly can be good parts of the latter tracks, I find them to be much too quiet, much too somber, and way too tempered to be immersive, and to make my imagination run as I click through CK3's various buttons. But then, thank goodness, Paradox wisened up ever so slightly for the Northern Lords DLC, adding more regular tracks that actually carry melodic and immersive weight, and much more in line with their other games, with first, The Feast. Drakkar, and Scandinavia. I love these tracks. I mean seriously, they're some of the best in Paradox history all of a sudden and are complete originals, unlike much of CK3's more powerful initial OST, which is often based on musical themes from CK2. With Royal Court, good tracks, although a bit too timid in longer sections, which I think you can even spot in these previews, include Royal Council, Life at the Mott, and history was made in these walls. You can tell that these tracks are a lot more timid than the Northern Lords one, but at least they're more alive and playful than the original Mood tracks by a mile. Next up is the Fate of Iberia music, and I love the turn again to a more vibrant soundtrack, for example with the tracks of Mood 1, and Mood 2, which is even better. Sadly, some of the best tracks on this DLC is reversed for events, or they're much too short, like the War track, which is only 29 seconds in its entirety. Now comes the Friends and Foes DLC, and I have to say, it also brings perhaps my favorite track in the entire game, with the calm, beautiful, but also melodic and nostalgic Summer Crush. It just takes you away, doesn't it? I imagine laying in some Norwegian meadow surrounded by dandelions and a sun-filled sky on Midsummer's Eve, and I have to say, it doesn't get much better than that. Then we get Visitors from Afar, which to me only kicks off in enjoyment halfway through at this point. And then we get Shared Memories, which somehow is also one of my absolute favorite CK3 tracks, particularly because it has so much of that sense of fleeting nostalgia in it. Tours and Tournaments, one of the largest DLCs for CK3, has a ton of new and beautiful tracks for Tours and Tournaments events especially, but sadly not that many outside of it, and certainly not any with as much pomp and power. And I mean, listen to this track of Touring the Occident, which is just sublime. Or what about Land of Mystery? Romance in the Sultan's Garden, anyone? But again, these are shorter event tracks, and not regular music, like Backroom Diplomacy, which is at least an interesting and comforting tune, certainly a lot better than the base game's original mood tracks. And Longing for Home, which is also nice to listen to. When it comes to Wards and Wardens DLC, I find that most of its tunes are much too similar to the base game's mood tracks, like Before the Dawn and its variation, but I do like the parting clouds, since it at least has a sense of mystery and adventure to it. Then we have Legacy of Persia, and Chronicles of the Caliphate is a great example of the strong and melodic mood tracks we need more of. Finally, for this review, we have Roads to Power, CK3's Byzantium-focused DLC. In many ways, Roads to Power adds beautifully composed new tracks to the game, the vast majority of them arguably being tied to a Byzantine vibe, although some certainly more than others. Again, these are much more melodic than the base games, but even though they tend to not hit as hard as CK2's, and despite some being longer, monotonous chants, I love them nonetheless. My favorites are the Winds of Fortune, In the Name of the Lord, and Constantinople at Sunrise. All in all, I hope you understand my overall point here. CK3 has some fantastic pieces of music, but they're either not present enough, cut off due to the sound design, or there are too many quiet and in the background moody mood tracks that kind of ruin the vibe. And since this is not the case in any other Paradox Grand Strategy game, it saddens me that CK3 suffers from this musical dissonance, as it knows so clearly exactly how to showcase great music, but struggles with how to present them often and in their entirety. Now then, on to Crusader Kings 3's DLCs, which by now have added a host of new content that greatly impacts gameplay, either by adding on entirely new mechanics, or revamping and expanding old ones. And no, I won't be covering cosmetic packs like clothing here. CK3's first true DLC is also one of the most charming and essential one in my eyes, especially if you play as Vikings, namely Northern Lords. Northern Lords is CK3's answer to the old gods of CK2, at least in some fashion, in that it adds essential flavor content to Norse characters and their kingdoms. The main features of Northern Lords include Norse adventure realms, meaning they can actually attack a foreign realm and settle there by leaving your old lands behind, the ability to recruit and establish and interact with Jomsvikings and Shield Maidens, and even send Varangian guards to Constantinople. A host of new Norse cultural content, new art and music, and a handful of new decisions and events. In other words, there's no one massive feature here, but instead a variety of new content for Norse characters that enhances that part of the world almost exclusively, and as such is the perfect example of a flavor pack. When this released, it truly made a difference to me, as in my opinion on launch, CK3 overall was so devoid of flavor, of intricate and unique cultural opportunities that CK2 was the objectively better game. But Northern Lords proved that CK3 could throw hands too, and for that reason, and of course because it made it so much more fun to take my beloved Harald Hårfagre, raid a few Englishmen with the new pillage events, and forge the Kingdom of Norway as King Harald Fairhair. I truly love it. But if you do not play as Vikings or Norsemen, this DLC is much less relevant, and frankly not at all needed really. Believe it or not, CK3's next DLC launched almost an entire year later, meaning that CK3 stood still longer than any other modern Paradox game to date as far as I'm aware. But the result was Royal Court, an expansion which did something no other Paradox game had ever done before, namely provide a full 3D environment of your titular Royal Court. A place where you and your spouse, council members, courtiers, and other relevant figures hang out and end up in various events and dilemmas. The courts are mostly beautifully rendered and varies from culture to culture, and it is a marvel in itself that these renders are possible in a map and UI-based strategy game like this. With that being said, I would have liked more court variety, because seeing the same exact courts for ruler after ruler, even though they might differ per culture, does get familiar. It has to be said though that Royal Court does make it possible for you to take matters into your own hands and actually spice up the look of your court yourself, as hanging banners and placing various treasures around the room is possible, which is a very neat and immersive feature. Side by side with these amenities also comes the return of personal artifacts, like jewels, rings, swords, crowns, and what have you, all of which can be of varying quality and rarity. Artifacts like these must be maintained lest they decay into ruin. They provide various bonuses and can be given or taken to and by other characters, which makes it particularly fun to come across a valuable item that once belonged to Mr. X and Lady Y. That same idea of taking other character stuff is present in the court artifacts as well, and a personal favorite of mine is fighting a war against a powerful enemy, winning battles, and then finding their banner on the battlefield, before hanging that banner up as a trophy in my court. The court isn't just for show, of course, because the court also signals to both your fellow countrymen and foreign characters how splendid and impressive you are. Each court is ranked on a scale of 1 to 10 called Court Grandeur, and is determined, lowered, and raised by a multitude of factors such as court artifacts, random events and how you deal with them, people you employ, natural sway towards an equilibrium, and importantly by way of court amenities. Court amenities are essentially the main bulk of what your court offers, such as the quality of the food, beds, entertainment, fashion, and so on, even introducing languages now that lends a new dynamic to character backgrounds and the dynamism of your court. Increasing the quality of these amenities does cost you money, but the higher grandeur might be worth it if you wish to attract better foreign characters to your court. The court is also an important place to project your rule by actually holding court, hearing the pleas of characters and their troubles, and sometimes deal out justice when two characters are opposed to each other. Now while this is a cool feature in theory and it's nice that it's there, I do feel like it does get tedious after the first few court holdings. You see, many of the events are the same, there's rarely much in it for you, and it doesn't feel that game-changing in a fun way. Now whether this is meant to emulate the boredom kings and queens actually felt in real life when holding court is another matter, but I do feel like this feature in particular could be made a lot more fun. I do find it cool, however, that new vassals have the option to pay homage to their liege once they rise to their new rank, but also that vassals can request favors from their king when certain conditions are met. But even though the Royal Court is the main event in Royal Court, the undeniably coolest feature in my opinion is a set of features of mechanics I've talked about before, namely the divergent and hybrid cultures. This is actually a part of the Royal Court DLC, but is so integral to the experience for me now that I cannot imagine playing the game without them. In other words, while the Royal Court itself is cool, it's not perfect, and it is for the cultural features that I would truly recommend this DLC, especially if you enjoy playing in culturally dynamic regions and have a lot more role-playing opportunities with culture. And then, suddenly only 3 to 4 months later, comes one of the most transformative expansion concepts of Paradox history, Fate of Iberia. Fate of Iberia is another flavor pack in the vein of Northern Lords, seeing as it essentially solely focuses on factions in Iberia, but it does so in a very unique way. This DLC was the first to introduce the so-called struggle mechanic, a feature which bundles together a bunch of factions in a region and gives them unique mechanics that affect all of them at the same time. The struggle for Iberia mimics the historical currents in Iberia during the Middle Ages, pitting Christians and Muslims in a kind of battle royale, but where alliances, intermingling, and friendship can actually be the end goal. and the end goal of a struggle is either domination or peaceful coexistence of many types, and the path to get there is divided into various stages of conflict and appeasement. Personally, I find the struggle concept extremely intriguing and fun, especially because in each stage, various actions go towards a new, different stage, meaning that actions of peace and friendship goes toward resulting in a peaceful resolution, while the opposite is true for warfare and hostile actions. What I personally love is that despite religious intermarriage being impossible by default elsewhere in the world, unless your religion specifically allows it, which they rarely do by the way, they are possible in Iberia for involved characters, i.e. characters with a stake in the struggle. The struggle mechanic often takes hundreds of years to conclude if it ever does, and so it becomes a big part of life in the Iberian world until one of the conclusions are met. At any rate, this struggle mechanic made me wish for similar features all over the world, since it really makes that specific region so unique. But alas, in the almost 2 years since the Fate of Iberia's release, we've only received one more struggle location, but that's for a much later DLC. Other features in Fate of Iberia includes new music, clothing, artworks, and events, but the struggle mechanic is the main event here, and if you love playing Iberia, it is a must-have for sure. But if not, perhaps wait for a sale and see how you feel. Friends or Foes is a micro DLC of sorts, adding only new events as they relate to forming friendships and rivalries, while also adding some new musical tracks. While I find the events to be nowhere near required to play this game, it's nice to have a bit more flavor, but the real hero of this DLC is the music, especially Summer Crush and Shared Memories, two of the loveliest musical pieces in the game. So for me, and for those 2 tracks only, is this DLC more than worth it. An entire 10 months pass by, and we finally receive what I deem to be the most essential CK3 DLC out there, Tours and Tournaments. Whereas Royal Court put our asses in the actual room, Tours and Tournaments finally takes us out of it by offering a whole new means of gameplay, namely travel. You see, whether you're touring your land by visiting your vassals and demanding fealty, attending grand weddings in foreign capitals, partying with your vassals in smaller feasts, going on hunting trips in the forest or attend actual tournaments where people from all over the world attend to show off their prowess and skills, our characters must now deal with traveling and journeying, leaving the comforts of home while a regent takes your place, a regent who might uphold your rule or try to coup the throne, making it potentially a truly game-changing choice to leave your capital and allow your regent to rule in your stead. Truly, Tours and Tournaments is the definition of an immersive experience, but it almost feels like it could have been a part of Royal Court, since so many of its features deal with high-level events and kingly activities. But let's get to the first part of this DLC, namely the tours, because in my opinion, they're not only the most fun, but also the most important. And let's begin with the grand weddings, because I just love love. Weddings were a big part of noble medieval life, not just because the way to happiness is through the joys of the loins, but because it was the foremost way to bind dynasties together, and in CK3's case, to marry your way to the top. But all the way through CK history, weddings have arguably been an underwhelming affair, with little pomp surrounding them. Now though, weddings can, if you have the money, become a truly grand affair. For while you can still enjoy a quiet marriage without much fuss, a truly ambitious monarch will use them for all they're worth, and you can now do so by promising to arrange a grand wedding. A grand wedding is a truly great, but costly affair, available only to those with a few hundred gold pieces in their purses, especially if you want to come away with happy guests. And it works like this. You send a marriage offer or betrothal as usual, but now you're given the option to hold a grand wedding. Clicking this option is the only way to do so actually, so if you want a celebration, you better be ready to choose it. Luckily, a grand wedding can be held at any point within a 3-year time limit, giving you some time to gather the cash if you need to. Should you fail to arrange the wedding within that time, however, you will receive some major penalties for breaking your promise, and will also lose your spouse-to-be in the process. If you are able to arrange it though, you'll have a great time. First, I just want to say how much I adore what Paradox has and continues to do with the UI in CK3. Because it really is beautiful. Gorgeous artwork down the various options here, and as you can see, we have 2 of them. We can put on a happy wedding as is normal and healthy, or with enough intrigue, you can arrange for a bloody red wedding, with the intent of murdering one or more of the participants. But for the most part, we are all about happy weddings here at Andy's Paradox, something I can personally attest to. Choosing this option reveals a new layer of the campaign map, allowing us to actually choose in which city the wedding will be held. Again, the UI elements are just so succulent here, as I love the various emblems and symbols. The most important thing to worry about here though, is how much money you wish to spend on the wedding, with the grandness of it all depending on how lavish you wish the entertainment, food, and decorations to be. While the average cost is said to be around 300, I really like that we can actually customize this ourselves, because other than just the money aspect, putting on a grand wedding and making it actually grand has in-game consequences as well. With better options, you can expect to gain better bonuses, traits, get more likes from your peers, and just have a chance at an overall better time. In this way, much like in history, the rich and powerful will be able to offer the most decadent wedding parties. It's also a nice way to see how far you've come when you can actually pig out and not care about costs anymore. Once everything is settled, guests will travel from far and wide, and the wedding commences once most of them have arrived. At this point, there is a number of events that transpire, all of them leading up to the actual wedding ceremony that enables various outcomes and chances to meet new people. This also depends on what you've chosen for your personal goal with the wedding, namely what you want to get out of it, other than actually arranging or witnessing a wedding, of course. Focusing on diplomacy will allow you to better your relations with specific individuals, for example, while recreation mainly revolves around having a good time. Once the party is over and the union has been consummated, it's time to return home and witness all the good things that have come from the celebration. Weddings is a genuinely great mechanic now, as it's been given so much more meaning and spectacle, while also offering cool events and some nice new sound effects to heighten immersion. I personally like hosting weddings to commemorate some grand achievement, to roleplay the coming together of the realm when peace has been established, or just to make my mark. As a William the Conqueror who had just established himself as the King of England, I arranged for a grand wedding for my son the Prince. Even though my court and capital remained in France, I chose to hold a wedding in England to bring the realm together, meaning I also had to travel back home to court afterwards. And speaking of returning home, the actual journey, or the tour, is a major part of this new DLC. And this brings us to the Grand Tours mechanic. Role-playing is arguably what Crusader Kings 3 is all about, but in the past, role-playing as a monarch has mostly been relegated to changing vassal contracts or just tossing people in jail and strip them of their titles. The royal court helped too, of course, but it still only kept you in one place, in one room even. Now though, actually touring and visiting the various vassals in your realm is paramount to ensure your authority is maintained, and comes with both opportunities and perils. Much like grand weddings, grand tours cost money, and depending on just how grand you want it to be, in this case how large your entourage is, will once again demand a pretty penny. But the best part of the grand tours is that there are more ways to customize this mostly once-in-a-decade journey. You see, not only can you choose for what purpose you are traveling, meaning whether you're going for the prestige and relationship gains, or indeed for intimidation or taxation purposes, but you can also choose which vassals you want to visit. You can choose up to 10 vassals on each journey, each one adding a bit of cost to the total travel price and the actual length of the tour. Here too, a special overlay map exists, one that beautifully maps the journey you'll take. As you travel and stop at the various locations, events will appear that will give you a chance to interact with both the local lord and the local population. I particularly like the fact that we can demand tribute from each lord as a sign of loyalty, but it's up to them whether they will accept. It's not all doom and gloom if they choose not to, however, for that gives you a valid reason to imprison them. To me, the tours are the best part of this whole thing because it really feels like you're finally moving beyond the confines of just being a character in a window. Weddings can of course do the same, like when I moved William the Conqueror from Angiers to London to celebrate his son's wedding, but that was of course a short trip. Tours are something different entirely, and let me tell you just how awesome they are. As Harold Fairhair, I had just managed to unite Norway into one kingdom and finally finished dealing out titles. The first order on the agenda was of course to consolidate my rule, and so a grand tour made a lot of sense. I planned my tour, visiting jarls from north to south, sampling the local customs, and I even journeyed overseas to my island possessions. What's more is that I was able to decide what I wanted to do for each visit, whether that was partaking in feasts or tour the local countryside. It took more than a year to complete this journey, but once it was over, I really felt like I had been somewhere, toured the country, and proved once and for all to my vassals who the one true king of Norway was. And it's really, really great. If you want to tour the entire kingdom, or indeed partake in someone else's activity far away, you might need to consider the dangers of such activities, however. Dangers might lay in wait on the path, including events, whether on the road, in the mountains, or indeed on the high seas. Good thing then that we can recruit mercenaries or other helpers to guide us safely through these various biomes, although this will increase your expenses further. Additionally, a major new feature is the new regency system, which will kick in if you're on a journey. While this is part of the free patch, it does affect this DLC as well. Essentially, regencies now kick in whether you are away from the capital, and your designated regent will temporarily assume power. It doesn't end there though, as regents can now vie for power over the throne itself, ultimately attempting to become a king in all but name. and perhaps even king itself. You may give the regent orders, but depending on their selflessness or ambitions, they will attempt to thwart you. You can always try to push back by spending resources, but best to appoint a reliable person, your regent, as long as you can. Alternatively, if you're not the liege lord, you can always try to turn the tables yourself and become the most powerful regent the world has ever seen, pulling the levers from the shadows. That's all to say that you need to be mindful of going on long journeys, because you might just get bamboozled by your regent. The very last part of the Tours and Tournaments DLC is in fact the tournaments, and depending on your preference, this might be the coolest part. Like the other features, tournaments offer a number of options for how you wish to arrange it. We are given several choices here, each one determining which part of noble society you wish to contend in. More open up over time as well, or depending on your culture or whether you are a tribal or feudal society. For example, as Harald, I competed in a brawl event where the best fighter won, but as a more diplomatically inclined duchess, I partook in a recital competition, risking neither life nor limb. This all comes atop a brand new and beautiful UI window, allowing us to tour parts of the tournament grounds over time as long as the remaining days of the tournament allows for it. Spend time praying for victory in the church or visit other locations to gain some inside scoops on what's going on, and accomplish your goals once again depending on your own chosen aim for the activity. Just like the other events, the Grand Tournament is a wonderful way to display the greatness of your realm, and becomes even cooler by the fact that the types of tournaments increases and become available over time. These are the major and best additions to CK3 in Tours and Tournaments in my opinion, but there's even more here. New knightly accolades allow you to designate special knights with prestigious honors, and you can even have them fight in your stead in certain events like trials by combat. In addition, character armor will now change over time, showing the evolution of armor and clothing in Western medieval clothing from the early to late Middle Ages. In my opinion, Tours and Tournaments is perhaps the single best piece of CK3 DLC to date, first and foremost because there is so much content here, and more or less all of it is great, greatly expanding on features that were already there, or bringing entirely new ones that I didn't even know I needed. And just as with Royal Court, Tours and Tournaments is one of those grand universal DLCs that impacts every character no matter who or where you play, and it's become integral to my CK3 experience at least. Next up is Wards and Wardens, another micro DLC that focuses on improving education and the raising of children. While it does add a host of new immersion events which are nice, the single most important feature here is the act of taking and receiving hostages, either during war or for diplomatic reasons. Hostages allow you to hold a certain sway over another ruler, say dissuading them from starting a war on you because you hold their child's life in your hands, or give up a hostage to ensure they do not attack you. Hostages can also be exchanged in peace deals, and even though it might not have the biggest impact, it's a very nice feature that does feel immersive and acts as a legitimate path to keep the peace between you and another realm for at least a little while longer. Legacy of Persia, much like Fate of Iberia, is another flavor pack centered around the struggle mechanic, but this time focusing on Persia and the various conflicts between the declining Abbasid Caliphate and the surrounding Persian kingdoms vying for power. The pack includes things like new buildings and designs, new clothing and UI artwork, new Persian flavored events and music, and so on. But it's by and large a Persian-themed Fate of Iberia, and does many of the same things but for the Persian region. I said earlier that I wish more regions had struggle mechanics, and this is exactly what I wanted. But I have to say that I wish Paradox could make these struggles faster, and include more per struggle DLC, since it feels like they are easier to make, and one could potentially include several new struggle regions per DLC. Either way, you have basically very little need for this DLC if you only play outside of Persia, to be honest, but if you love playing in this unique region and want some new flavor and experiences as Muslim and clan-based factions, then it absolutely does the job. Legends of the Dead comes with two major features in particular. First, the Legends, and second, the Dead. Legends are all about writing your characters and dynasty stories, passing them down from one generation to the next, and attempting to create stories that pass the test of time. And on the surface, it's actually a really cool feature. I love the new interface, which is in fact a beautifully rendered page of a book, including your character off to the side, and I like how these legends are created over time by interacting with your court chronicler. The fact that powerful legends come with positive outcomes elsewhere, like stronger legitimacy cementing your rule, which came with the accompanying free patch, or allowing you to build great legendary buildings and the like, is also great. And I love that legends are not just generic, but will often be tailored to local cultures or characters. But I find that the gameplay aspects themselves aren't as much fun. For one, the legends and the way they are written are often too boring to find truly epic, and sometimes they don't even make much sense, either contextually or the fact that they even appear when they've got nothing to do with being legendary. There's also such a thing as having too many pop-ups, and I think if there's an issue I have in CK3 is that there are so many interruptions to gameplay now. There are just so many various pop-ups, almost constantly honestly, that it feels like I'm not allowed to play the game for more than a few seconds uninterrupted, lest a pop-up from one of the game's various parts show up. This is not at all the same in EU4, Victoria 3 and so on, but even in CK2, I think these shorter text and smaller menus, and generally a bit fewer pop-up events, kind of mitigated this feeling. The fact is that even though CK3's gameplay is largely in menus, pop-ups will often show up to, in my opinion, slow down gameplay. And there are so many of them that I often just skip the context text entirely and just look at what my choices are. That being said, the concept of Legends themselves is awesome. I just wish it felt a bit more down to earth, and that the writing itself was better structured and felt more natural. Because now they sometimes just don't make any sense. The second part concerns plagues and diseases, and is in concept one of those major CK2 features that never made it into CK3. Until now, that is. Historically, diseases and afflictions on a country or region basis were important and prevalent, and so in terms of immersion, it's awesome that CK3's finally implemented a system of viral diseases one must deal with. They are dangerous after all, ranging from regular poxes to the Black Death itself, threatening to kill a large number of characters as they pass through the realm, and in the best cases, they feel dangerous and scary. To contend with this new threat, you get to build hospitals and take shelter in your castle and so on, meaning we are technically on par with the CK2 system here. The most important free feature that came with this update is legitimacy. Weirdly enough, a feature that wasn't in the game before, even though it sounds so natural. But it's actually really good, even though it hangs out in the background most of the time. Its impacts, however, are many. Legitimacy determines how your rule is looked upon, your right to rule essentially, and can be influenced by a host of actions found all around the game. And the same goes for losing legitimacy. But legitimacy doesn't just affect things like opinion, but has consequences for the cost of establishing claims on foreign lands, whether foreign rulers accept becoming your vassal, short ruler duration time, which is important to prevent civil wars and coups, how quickly your renown increases, and whether people wish to marry into your family. Legitimacy is important then, but is something you don't necessarily have to constantly be thinking about since it's often interacted with through other means, and I like that a lot. All in all, Legends of the Dead is a DLC that introduces and reintroduces some interesting mechanics, but in my opinion executes many of them only decently, well enough that I think it's a so-so DLC that could have used a few more months in the oven to make existing features better or add even more to it. And finally, we have caught up with CK3's latest major DLC. Roads to Power is one of the most quintessential expansions to CK3 ever. Roads to Power introduces major features that simply weren't possible in CK2, and that now, depending on whether you wish to go on grand adventures or not, you may not want to live without. But let's talk about my darling first, Byzantium, and one obvious feature of this update we haven't talked about yet, that new start date. Roads to Power unlocks an entirely new era to begin your campaign in, namely 1178, a time of great upheaval, and is rather iconic since it's around the time period when the movie Kingdom of Heaven takes place. Here, England is suddenly a major power in France, threatening to upend the balance of power in Western Europe. The Holy Roman Empire must contend with an emboldened and independent Italy, whose princes and republics know they're just a war away from being re-holified. In Spain, the Reconquista is well underway, threatened only by a unified Moorish emirate. And in the east, Byzantium remains a powerful force to be reckoned with, yet one who must stand against the rising tide of the Seljuk Turks in Anatolia, while the Crusader states spearheaded by the Kingdom of Jerusalem experience a most uncertain time, as the Ayyubids led by Sultan Saladin wishes to reclaim the Holy Land once and for all. This is an age of what-ifs and why-nots, an age where crusades will either save Christianity in the Holy Land or abandon it in darkness. The era of the Third Crusade, which is the pivotal event occurring not long after this beginning, is an era of characters that might at times mean more to you than even those of 1066. England and France might begin with a Henry and a Louis, but among their children awaits a future King Richard the Lionheart and a Philip II, both who will join the Third Crusade as allies, but who later will fight bitterly over dominion of France, a war which ultimately will decide the fate of Europe. In the Holy Roman Empire, Kaiser Frederick Barbarossa, who would lead the empire for 35 long years and who already went to Jerusalem in the Second Crusade, is also intent on joining the coming Third, but only fate will decide if he ends up drowned in a river. And of course, in the Holy Land, King Baldwin leads a weakened Jerusalem with his sister Sibylla as his heir, and Saladin leads the powerful Ayyubids, who intends to descend upon the kingdom at any moment. For myself, a person who not only adores this time period because of Kingdom of Heaven, but also because of Medieval 2's Crusades campaign, this is a very welcoming age. But importantly, it's also an age where Byzantium, whom I realized it took a while to get back to, is facing a lot of challenges, but with this DLC, a lot of opportunities as well. You see, this is a pivotal moment in Byzantine history. Under the emperorship of Basileus Manuel, Byzantium stands strong. In possession of large territories in Europe and still in control of much of Anatolia, it remains a powerful player, and if you play your cards right, it's far from impossible to bounce back. But you must now deal with Hungarian and Bulgarian raiders in the north, the Sultanate of Rum in the east, seriously consider protecting Jerusalem in the south, and of course deal with your own internal problems. And this is where Byzantium truly shines in Roads to Power. First of all, Byzantium is no longer a feudal realm, but an administrative empire, a new government form in CK3 reserved for realms who adopt it. An administrative realm's most crucial aspect is the fact that it runs on influence and a new system of succession and governorship. You see, instead of the feudal system, where titles are passed down from title holders to heirs within a family, titles in an administrative empire are held by a governor, and is then given to an influential character who has vied to inherit the title through influence investment. Sure, the current holder can have their son or heir inherit the title, but it requires that they invest enough influence to do so. And who will be the next governor is further influenced by a bunch of other factors too. If the current governor has no heir, or there is no one else in line to take over the governorship through the use of influence, the title returns to the emperor or empress, and they will then be able to hand it out to anyone they wish. At the core of this lies influence, a new resource which is gained and lost within administrative empires, and essentially represents your political power within the realm. Influence is first and foremost used to assert yourself in succession battles for governorships, meaning administrative duchies or kingdoms within the empire. Here, a convenient new menu will show you all of the relevant governorships, and you can influence any of them to help determine their next candidate. And you can do so by either aiding a candidate of your choice or sabotaging a candidate you don't like. This is an option available for anyone in the realm, of course, so it's vital to spend your influence wisely and use it where it counts, or where it dukes. Consider also that influence functions the same way the other resources does. It is a spendable resource, but by accumulating it over time, you also inherently become more influential, which lends you a better starting scheming success chance for political schemes. In essence, this means that while titles aren't hereditary per se, they can effectively become so if you continuously focus on keeping a title in the family through the use of influence, and if you manage to avoid losing it by, say, revolting against the emperor, losing a war, and having it removed. It also means that if you are a governor, it's possible to amass control of several governorships if enough influence is used effectively, or that you can influence who else becomes governors in neighboring provinces. In other words, the candidacy system allows for an open system of succession where everyone participates out in the open, yet still one that requires careful maneuvering and planning if you wish to get ahead. It's even possible to outwardly depose another governor, which immediately removes him from power and installs the next character in the line of succession. And this is where the fun begins. You see, we're still playing out in the open now, but let's say that you are a governor that's unmarried. Marrying tactically in the Byzantine Empire means to sometimes marry strong heirs to other governorships. Because if you now have enough influence or power in the realm, you may force the current leader to step down, which now immediately installs your spouse as the new governor if they are first in line. And of course, since any offspring will be of your dynasty, you'll soon find yourself with an easier path to have your dynasty increase its power in the empire. There is, however, more subtle ways to make your mark. We now have a number of new scheming options for administrative realms, schemes which allow you to either bolster your allies or sabotage your opponent's candidacy scores. You can have them increase your score for a specific region, and you can even show your support or disdain for the emperor by fostering their legitimacy in return for favors, or damage it by spending influence. Certain schemes though, like subsuming or basically taking over neighboring themes through influence, are only available to powerful families or above, and this is where an entirely new system enters the fray. You see, Byzantium is not just made up of governors, but families, and the empire distinguishes between the imperial, dominant, powerful, and noble families. Each family's power is based on a number of factors like living dynastic members, family members holding titles, etc., which in turn will determine that house's family score. The more powerful you are, the more options will be open to you, like being able to hold multiple governor titles of the same tier, or being given a discount to promoting candidates. Governor efficiency is another mechanic in administrative realms, where each governor governor's capabilities are measured based on their skills and traits. Essentially, the higher your governor efficiency, the more taxes and levies you'll be able to get from the province. And like with candidacies, you can also scheme to improve or slander the ability of other governors to run their provinces. It's a feature that's mostly in the background, but which you should try to improve through increasing your character's skill, for example, or devoting yourself to certain lifestyles that increases them. It can also be good to factor in this skill when you choose characters to give certain regions to, since the better they govern, the better it is for the empire. This entire system, how influence interacts with the governorships, and how we now have basically constant empire-wide diplomatic power struggles, since yes, governors cannot go to war with each other, is amazing. It suddenly feels like you're playing in an alternate ecosystem, one where every succession depends on your ability to keep it in the family, but one where you can actually make a more or less immediate impact. Rather than feudal or clan systems, the administrative government form essentially provides you the tools to create primogeniture successions from the start, although there's always the risk of more or less losing it all if you're not using your influence the right way. Rather than focusing on constant conquest, it does make you consider your internal empire options more, find out who your friends are, and carefully consider how to grow your family's power within the borders. And even though it's not technically an elective empire like the Holy Roman Empire, it is one based on candidates, and even the emperor isn't safe when both legitimacy, influence, and powerful families have a say in how successions turn out. And I think a lot of players will enjoy the change of pace and dilemmas just as much as I do. And this is where we'll have to talk about another cool feature, the army, and more importantly, the imperial armies. You see, more than just having your own knights, men-at-arms, and general levies, administrative realms also feature armies that are inherent to the various governorships. This means that even though you personally cannot recruit Varangian guards as men-at-arms, the imperial title holder can. And whenever the imperial title changes hands, whomever succeeds the current emperor, the imperial men-at-arms will always remain the same, unless they of course are increased or diminished in size. This goes for every governorship too, meaning that governors can improve the fighting capabilities of their title outside of their own personal power, and means that you can remain militarily powerful even though you may not own that many personal holdings. In addition, the emperor can, through the use of influence, muster the armies of the various provinces under the rule of the governors in order to substantially increase the size of the active imperial army. It's a system you might not be aware of right from the get-go, but it's important to pay attention to because it can determine both the strength of your vassals and the possibility to swell your own in times of need. It's also where a system of direct orders and administration come in, which means that you can actually tell your governors what you wish them to focus on. Kind of like province edicts in EU4, you can actually dictate that your vassals focus on certain tasks through the theme administration, like tasking it to be a border province with higher defensive capabilities, strengthening their trade, or assuming a balanced approach. Alongside this is the personal efforts of the characters or the vassal directives, and you can ask your governors to focus on increasing their levies, improving the development of their provinces, converting their faith, promote your culture, construct certain buildings, and more. Likewise, it's not only the liege who can ask vassals to change their administration, but vassals can themselves request to change it, which can be very useful if you want your governorship to develop in a different way, with new priorities. As you can tell, if you want to get as much out of the system as possible, it's good to know where your outside enemies and allies are, where you can focus on trade and civilization, where you should quell unrest, and where it's wise to raise fortifications and defensive capabilities. It's a system that fleshes out even further the administrative realm, and it's truly awesome to see. And what makes it extra fun isn't just the fact that it's a deep system with a lot of granularity and changeability, but that if you don't want to deal with it, you don't really have to. A lot of these systems work on their own in the background by default from the start, the theme system especially. And what's even better is that both liege and vassal can change it up if they wish and have the power to do so. Perhaps this feature especially puts the administration in the administrative empire, and much more than a feudal realm, feels like you're finally able to manage a realm on a deeper level, definitely supplanting the vassal contract of feudal realms. In fact, in a game that has still yet to implement the in-depth law system from CK2, I find that the administrative directives help to bring some of that feeling back, even though they're technically edicts instead of laws. Either way, they're extremely welcome and makes Byzantium and this type of government feel all the more unique and, well, administrative. There is one more feature concerning administrative empires we have to talk about though, and that is the estate system. a brand new feature that essentially allows a minor centralization of power into the hands of the househead of a noble family, and is separated completely from landed titles, meaning you actually don't need to control land to control an estate. An estate is for all intents and purposes almost like owning an independent city that you can expand and improve on, resulting in things like increased income, stress loss, more piety, and better men-at-arms. Raising new or improving buildings does cost a pretty penny, just like regular city improvement, so the estate will mean a lot more over time depending on how much you invest into it, and depending on your goals, you'll have to carefully decide whether to improve your estate first or the cities under your control. The schemes we talked about earlier also extend to the estates, as it's possible to go on raids and attack the estates of other estate holders to sack them for gold, lower the influence of the target, and perhaps even dispose of certain family members. What's also interesting about this update is that it comes with a radical new scheme system. First of all, in the planning stage, you're incentivized to recruit co-conspirators who will fulfill different roles, enhancing your ability to not get caught or successfully executing it. But what's more is that as long as your scheme remains a secret over the course of at least 7 months, you gain so-called advantages, which if you accumulate enough, will increasingly improve your chances of success. But the crazy thing about this scheme in particular is that once it's all done, even if you are successful, you're going to end up being known for having executed the scheme. The target family will despise you, and what you'll have to view this as then is a type of family feud, show of force type of thing. Now, you may also be the victim of foreign plots against your estate, but by raising defensive buildings, you can increase the likelihood of stopping them in their tracks. Now, I think estates and domiciles like these is a very interesting feature, and it's especially important for what we're going to talk about next. For administrative characters though, it's an immersive way to build up your own little wealth haven and to interact with those of others. I do think that the estate UI window is beautifully drawn, and I can see what they went for here, and I truly do respect the aim of creating something that looks distinctly medieval. But I have to be honest and say that I wish they had chosen a different art direction. What's interesting about the current state of CK3 is that it doesn't really feature a coherent visual style. The campaign map is rendered in 3D, but zoom far away up and it all turns into a 2D paper map. Enter your royal court and it's all in full 3D. Host a tournament and suddenly you're seeing a sort of gorgeous 2.5D window of tournament grounds and a small town that's fully animated. And now open the estate menu and we're seeing what could have been a medieval drawing or something akin to a tapestry. And personally, I kinda wish the estate menu looked more like the tournament one, where we saw it rendered beautifully and more immersively, where you could see your different buildings increase in size as you went. And even though their drawings do change, which is a nice touch, I just think it's a lost opportunity to make further use of that beautiful tournament UI they made just a few DLCs ago, particularly since I feel like it brings a stronger sense of realism to the game. Further, I think it's a bit of a shame that raiding estates does not give you dread, since it does feel like exerting your power against other families in such a big way is exactly what dread is all about. All in all though, it's always nice to have more ways to spend your money, exert your influence, and deal with other families, and I'm happy that the estate system is here and perhaps also open for further additions in the future. Those were the major features associated with Byzantium and the new administrative realms, but there's an entirely different and yet another massive aspect to Roads to Power. As a first in the Crusader Kings series, or frankly, in any Paradox game as far as I'm aware, it's now possible to play as an unlanded character, aka an adventurer, a person with no titles whatsoever to their name, but one who essentially leads an army for hire, and whose only claim to power is their army camp. To play as one, you can either choose to play as one of the many pre-made unlanded from the character selection screen, with many of them being major historical figures of legend, like Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, or as he's better known as, El Cid, or if you want to truly roleplay, you can even make your own adventurer, like I did when I made a Norwegian Viking for hire in the Kingdom of Jerusalem during what's going to be a very turbulent time. Again, I feel like I have to reiterate here. Unlanded characters own no titles whatsoever, in a game that has for its entire lifetime been all about owning land, and ever more of it. That has meant arranging marriages for alliances and future successions and claims, waging large wars, managing counties and buildings, and administrating the realm through your court and vassals. All of those responsibilities are for all intents and purposes gone as long as you are unlanded, but they have been replaced with new and exciting mechanics to varying degrees. Your camp is your new home, and even though it's always stationed somewhere, you get to decide where that somewhere is. As long as you are prepared for the journey with provisions and travel companions to make sure you don't die on the road, you can literally travel the world, see the sights, visit the cities, and even go fishing if the fancy strikes you. This makes it so CK3 opens up in a whole new way, because while journeying to other cities on say pilgrimages was neat in turns and tournaments onwards, this is something completely different. your camp kind of acts like its own little city, just like estates do, and you may upgrade your camp with various amenities as you go, and as long as you have the money and the right traits and camp purposes for it. You see, your camp, i.e. your moving realm, must choose a purpose, namely a way of being. This determines your aptitude in various missions you'll be taking on, so a camp with the swords for higher purpose will be better at taking on missions concerning war and fighting, while the other purposes does the same for their respective areas. It's a neat way of tailoring your camp to various playstyles and ensures that to a big degree, your life doesn't just have to revolve around war and fighting even though you lead a band of mercenaries. And again, these purposes will impact the buildings you can raise in your camp, so changing them up might be smart over time if you wish to diversify your capabilities and opportunities. What I like about the camp is that much like the estates, it can become a lot bigger than you might think. Because even though there's only 5 different main camp slots, many of the slots can be expanded with new upgrades even outside of the main branch. This allows you to tailor your camp even further, and you'll be surprised at how long you'll be upgrading and expanding it. Again though, I would have loved for the camp to have the same visual flair as the Turning Grounds, because I don't find the albeit beautifully drawn artwork here that appealing in a gameplay and immersion sense. The life of an unlanded character is extremely freeing compared to that of a landed one. For one, you may move about as you wish, but you're always seeking out opportunities wherever you go. Depending on where your camp is located, new contracts will show depending on what's going on there and what the local lords need. So while some areas will have lords asking you to join them in a war, help them safeguard a bridge from bandits, or aid them in training their knights, others will ask you to actually act like bandits or wage a war to capture characters from an enemy realm. Now some of these will simply demand that you raise your army and participate in the fighting, and in such cases, your military contribution to the war will often determine the prize money you receive after it, and of course if your contractor wins or not. But other times, and I'd say in the majority of cases, contracts will take on the role of schemes, where you'll invite your camp mates to take on various positions in the scheme. The schemes aren't necessarily bad or related to murder, but even if it's about protecting peasants in the area or subduing them, your closest knights and followers will aid in them. Now I do enjoy the various number of contracts, but I must admit that I do find many of these scheming contracts kind of boring, because what happens is that you time and time again will do the same thing. Accept the contract, ask your followers to assume the different scheme positions, wait until you have enough success chance or enough opportunities, and then execute the scheme to various degrees of success. Since this can take some time and follow the same pattern of basically waiting for the scheme to be over, I much prefer the contracts related to fighting wars or escorting a lord from one city to another, since they feel more natural and organic, and moving your army around and fighting is after all quite a lot more fun gameplay wise than clicking on a few characters and waiting for the success meter to fill in. One important aspect of accepting and completing contracts is that you gain hooks of varying degrees on your contractors and are thus able to extort them for gold, provisions, knights or other goodies. One thing which is a bit confusing though is the marriage aspect of things, because as I found out, it can be difficult to understand how this feature works. I used my hook to try to arrange a marriage between a member of the Castilian royal family or any other potential spouse, but to my frustration, I had literally no options and the game did not tell me why this was. And even though no marriage happened, I had already spent my hook, which felt like a complete waste, and I was all the more confused for it. It turns out though that one way to get married and carry your adventure legacy over is to seduce a potential partner, ask them to join you in your camp, and then marry them there. I think the game should do a better job of explaining how this works, as this after all is a completely new way to play in more ways than one. I mentioned provisions, and this is the new resource mechanic for unlanded characters. It essentially acts as even more important supply modifiers where your camp and armies need provisions to survive, lest they succumb to starvation, mutiny, and death. And the hate of your followers, which is bad because their loyalty is important to keep high, because a happy camp of followers gives your camp positive modifiers. Provisions are gathered through contracts or events, and you spend provisions when you move your army and camp about, but not when stationary. It's an interesting mechanic that keeps you on your toes, and is arguably a replacement for the gold upkeep you'd have to pay as a landed character. This is of course a great advantage as unlanded, since you neither have to pay upkeep on your men-at-arms nor for characters' positions in your camp. What's so fun about being unlanded is that your allegiance is really only to yourself and the person you're temporarily working for. This means that as El Cid, for example, I completed various contracts for Christian lords in Castile at one point, and then moved south to Toledo in a Muslim taifa at another, helping various lords defeat their masters or aid them in getting from one place to another. And even though you begin as relatively weak, the fact that you expand your men-at-arms with new upgrades and that they cost no upkeep means that after a few years and making good money for contracts, you can end up making a massive regional difference. Your men-at-arms and knights-only army is professional after all, and it's exciting to encounter a much larger levy-based army and defeating them hands down because you're actually fielding armor knights and archers, where they are mostly pitchfork-carrying peasants. And yes, you can request invasions, or fascinatingly, enemy lords you're fighting against can tempt you with land in their realm if you stop fighting. But importantly, unlanded can make unique decisions once they're powerful enough to become great conquerors, and the new conqueror trait can turn entire regions and continents upside down, since it literally gives you a permanent forced vassalization casus belli, cuts your men-at-arms maintenance by 75%, removes the prestige and piety cost for casus belli, and more. Only a few leaders begin with this trait, like Sultan Saladin for example, but being able to go from unlanded to an unstoppable host and go in the footsteps of an Alexander, Attila, or a Genghis Khan is no small matter and is an awesome ability. Or of course, you can go on crusade and carve out a crusader state for yourself, if you wanna go landed. In essence, being unlanded is a great way to change up the gameplay of CK3 completely, to play a much more dynamic and vertical ship campaign where you begin as literally nothing, but may through ability and capability carve out your own empire in the end, unless of course you wish to continue being the most dangerous non-lord in the world. There are so many minor changes to Roads to Power, like the cool Harrowing of the North event for the Norman conquest of England, where you have to subdue your Anglo-Saxon vassals little by little to gain full control of the land, or the entirely new city model for say Constantinople, which like finally, or the new Byzantine Orthodox music. But these are the main aspects of the DLC, and as you can tell, this is a titan of an expansion. And you know what? Probably the best CK3 expansion of all time. Even though I said Roads to Power was the last DLC so far, Wandering Nobles is factually the latest one, even though it is a minor one, somewhat on par with Friends and Foes and Wards and Wardens. Wandering Nobles focuses on providing a better experience for landless and adventuring characters, with new lifestyles and traveling events, and in this sense, I think it does its job well as a type of flavor pack. But I think the problem here is that this DLC released just a month and a half after Roads to Power, and as such, I think it could have been released as a free update for a massive boost in public relations, because even though this DLC is fine as is, it just feels wrong to pay for an add-on to a bigger add-on, which arguably should have been a part of Roads to Power to begin with. And that completes our Crusader Kings 3 journey so far. In many ways, it's a game of contrast, because while the overall game itself is fantastic, when compared to its predecessor or contemporaries, it's suddenly a lot more things. At launch, it couldn't hold a candle to CK2's full package experience in most aspects, and despite offering some of the series' most innovative features, like 3D spaces and the first game with 3D characters, sometimes less is ironically more. It took a long time before CK3 finally began to establish its own identity. Honestly, it probably took around 3 years for it to do so, as I think it was around the time of tours and tournaments that I felt like CK3 finally began to truly offer a holistic experience that CK2 just couldn't do, even though that could have been true for Royal Court's new culture mechanics as well. That's not to say that it's only better than CK2 at this point, but it certainly can be argued that it is, or that it at least has added features that trump CK2's completely. I think my favorite aspects of CK3, as mentioned, is its approach to granularity in most things, but most of all, in its approach to cultural and religious choice and diversity. CK3, perhaps more than any other historical grand strategy game, is so full of options, so full of ways of being, allowing you to literally create an entirely new gaming experience every time you play. And that's not just a slogan, but the actual reality. CK3's AI, in my opinion, is fantastic, with so many moving pieces and personalities that know when to take advantage of you. And if you're not a person with literally thousands of hours on your hands and knows every ins and outs, I think you'll find that to be the case as well, at least if you try to play without crazy exploits or something. I still find the lack of a more interactive and immersive map to be a sore spot for this game, and the same goes for its musical sound direction, which despite having improved overall, is still nowhere near as immersive or fun to listen to as any other Paradox game, where the music takes center stage no matter what you're doing. People often give Paradox a hard time for producing a lot of DLC for their games. Personally, I find it only natural, and see it as a good thing since I generally want more content for games I like to play. We can discuss pricing of course, and the amount of content per pack is going to change my opinion on that specific DLC. But overall, Paradox's policy of releasing semi-regular paid DLC with accompanying free patches, the latter which by the way often add very meaningful and good changes, is fair. game development is expensive, and in a market where other strategy game developers either take way longer to produce less content or offer DLC that changes nowhere near as much as a Paradox DLC does, I take no issue with the policy of supporting a game over the course of years as long as it makes the game better every time. And frankly, in CK3's case, while not every update is equally game-changing, it certainly holds true here. CK3 is leagues better than it was in 2020 and has managed to retain a sense of uniqueness along the way. And frankly, I think that's pretty darn good. But Paradox isn't the only entity developing CK3, of course, because almost as important as the devs themselves to a living grand strategy experience like this are the modders. It is simply impossible to give the modders enough credit because they deserve it all. Modders have been able to take CK3's base experience and deliver truly game-changing mods that used to be unheard of, and I truly mean that. And I want to go over the most mind-blowing creations because it truly needs to be showcased. Up first is a list of vanilla-friendly mods that don't change the entire experience but aspects of the main game. Mod number 1, which is so close to my heart, is Holy Roman Triumph coronation ceremonies. I love me a good empire, but sadly their uniqueness is very rarely depicted in CK3. In fact, virtually never, since essentially every title rank shares the same system. Not with HRT though, as the Holy Roman Empire is now actually made unique and in the most awesome way possible. The Empire now has its very own window, showcasing the details on what's going on here. On top, we have the succession system, detailing the current Emperor, the current Heir Presumptive, and the 3 top candidates for succession based on votes, since the HRE runs on an Imperial elective succession system after all. Below, we have the Prince Electors, those you must sway to vote for your chosen candidate. So far though, both of these features, the Succession and the Electors, are kind of already featured in CK3 menus themselves. But what's completely new and seemingly taken inspiration from EU4 is what comes next, the Imperial Edicts and Imperial Authority. Imperial Edicts are relatively powerful Holy Roman specific decisions you get to make, based on your current era. However, none of them are permanent, but last for 5 years. They're not just positive though, as they do cost both resources and personal attribute levels, meaning you must think wisely on whether enacting them is worth it at any given time. They're not just positive though, as they do cost resources, meaning you must think wisely on whether enacting them is worth it at any given time. To enact them though, you need Imperial Authority, a unique value that increases over time, based on a number of values, such as Prestige and Dread. All of this is incredibly juicy and so welcome, and the mod has been severely improved since its first iteration, when it was far too detrimental to enact new Imperial Edicts. Honestly, this system is even better than CK2's ever was, and is almost on par with EU4's, which adds so much goodness to CK3's Holy Roman Empire experience. But more than this, Holy Roman Triumph actually introduces coronations, not just for the Holy Roman Empire even, but for the entirety of Roman Christendom, essentially on par with their CK2 counterparts. If you are a new ruler of king tier or higher, you may now ask the Pope or Archbishop or a local priest to crown you, giving a modifier that resembles your coronation status, and finally a proper crown on your head. Coronations work as activities, unlocking once you've chosen the one to crown you, and you may bask in various kinds of glory for various amounts of gold. I love this so much, and even though it would be nice if a crown also gave you more legitimacy, I'm so happy this feature is here. In other words, Holy Roman Triumph is an absolutely fantastic and recent addition to CK3 and could honestly be a full flavor pack on its own, so I bow my proverbial head to this mod author. Closely linked with HRT and the perfect mod to run alongside it is the Catholic Trinity, a mod focusing on the Catholic Church and its main aspects during this era, namely the College of Cardinals, the Pope, the question of investiture, and crusades. As it stands in CK3, Catholicism lacks a ton of features when compared to CK2, but Catholic Trinity sees this and says, "Not on my watch, buddy," and provides us with a glorious College of Cardinals system and UI. There are ever 21 cardinals at once, and new ones are elected as old ones die based on a point system. You may forward your candidate by investing gold into their candidature, but so may everyone else into their own, and the candidate with the highest candidate score wins the next open seat. This follows in the actual college as well, meaning that the sitting cardinal with the highest cardinal score, based on a number of factors related to their person, becomes Papabil or Papabil, essentially the next pope and leader of the Papal States and all of Christendom. This is not so easy, however. Accumulated piety, learning skill, age, and the Pope's personal opinion all increase the cardinal score, meaning that older characters are more likely to be elected. And since funding the campaign with 50 gold only increases their score by 5, and these scores are usually measured in the hundreds, you have to be extremely wealthy to successfully make a difference with money alone. Alongside this mechanic, we have a new system of investiture, where every kingdom tier realm or higher has either papal or free investiture, i.e. whether the Pope himself or the ruler is able to install archbishops. Papal investiture is the default and also the one the Pope demands you implement, giving you a personal opinion bonus with him. Free investiture will make the Pope despise you more or less, but nets you a hefty increase to theocracy vassal tax contributions if you have the prestige and piety to make the switch. There is even a system of anti-popes here, where it's possible to declare outright opposition to the Pope and install your own if you back up your candidate with sufficient might. A major feature of Catholic Trinity is the added feature of being able to actually play as the Pope in Rome, with the next ruler in line always being the next cardinal in waiting, the Papabile. This is wild actually, and makes for quite a unique playthrough that's separated from the usual dynasty ties. You coronate the kings of Europe when they ask if you choose to accept, you gain money from the income the church brings in across Europe, you may declare that only the Pope will appoint bishops, and yes, you can even call crusades after they've been enabled, and if you meet the requirements. You may in fact even excommunicate Catholic rulers against a large resource cost, and in a similar vein, spend piety to request claims on their lands, which I'm sure you'll accept. And as a Catholic ruler, you can even go on minor crusades to aid the newly erected Catholic kingdoms, or while on a crusade, if you're able to personally occupy a full duchy that's not part of the crusade target. You can therefore create a single independent Crusader state during the war, which is just insanely awesome and mimics what happened historically. In other words, the Catholic Trinity is simply unfathomably fantastic, and coupled with Holy Roman Triumph, we suddenly have ourselves the ultimate CK3 Catholicism experience that in fact even surpasses that of CK2 by miles and adds so much to this game. Mod number 3 is one extremely close to my heart because it literally fixes an aspect of CK3 that's eating at me, namely the uniqueness and immersion of cities and their development. While all CK3 cities look very similar and remains tiny models in vanilla, Cities of Wonder 3 either begins or allows you to create massive cities that actually look like it, providing 3D models that even outshine those of say Total War games where graphics have been a major selling point. Now getting to the point of building these cities yourself is tough, since cities that look this way are level 5 burgs. Now there is a way to get there faster through the creating a City of Wonder decision, which is nice to have, but it demands a hefty sum of gold and several years to accomplish, and if your realm already contains another level 5 city, you can't get there with this decision, but must wait for its natural growth and or your innovations to catch up. However, there are some unique cities that were historically large that begin as level 5 burgs, many of them in places like Italy, France, England with London, and more across North Africa and the Middle East and more. Some have relatively similar designs, like Salerno and Napoli for example, which are identical, but which still look so much better, larger, and richer than the regular models. Some have entirely unique designs though, like Jerusalem, which begins as a level 4 castle, but which when made into a City of Wonder level 5 burg, receives an entirely unique and beautiful model, complete with historical buildings and a gorgeous city wall layout. Other models like these include Baghdad, Toledo, and Constantinople, but let's return to that one later. Of course, Cities of Wonder 3 is not just a visual mod, but heavily impacts gameplay. The larger cities have better walls and more building icons, allowing for city-states or the owner of those holdings to become more powerful than they otherwise would. Owning a City of Wonder or a level 5 burg in general is a massive boon to any campaign, and with the newer updates and features, if you are playing as a duchy but own a City of Wonder as your capital, you're actually able to create a local kingdom and play tall. And of course, owning such a city gives you an advantage over your vassals who might not own one, both in terms of sheer siege defense and the extra income, legitimacy from owning such a city, and building capabilities. There's more to Cities of Wonder 3 than what I've laid out here, but it's such a fantastic and game-changing mod that touches every single character and campaign that I would never want to play without this again, and I highly recommend it. Now closely linked with Cities of Wonder 3, because it partly also deals with models, is medieval arts. And just like the former, it is also so much more. Medieval arts is all about bringing new life and cultural depth into CK3. First of all, Medieval Arts also offers a city model for Constantinople, but by enabling the game rule of Cities of Wonder 3 to play alongside MA, these mods are perfectly compatible and can be played together. This is how I get that beautiful Constantinople and a new gorgeous version of Nicaea to work alongside those awesome burgs of Cities of Wonder. But more than that, Medieval Arts adds a bunch of new 3D models and corresponding buildings that represent historical monuments, like the Lighthouse of Alexandria, the Acropolis, and so much more around the world. More than this though, if you are an owner of a country with a ruin, you get to manage that ruin, allowing you to maintain it lest it falls into disrepair. There are even modified or new cultural traits that reflect this feature, and we have an entirely new system dedicated to art and art styles, allowing you to create works of art yourself in the styles of your choice, even to the point of erecting unique castles and palaces for your benefit. Not just awesome for a mighty emperor, but enriching even further that playing tall experience. Medieval Arts and its submod, Medieval Arts More Special Buildings, add so many new historical buildings to the game in literally hundreds of cities across the world, with more than 1,000 new buildings, and is a must-play if you value an authentic and more immersive medieval artistic and architectural experience. A recent mod, but no less fantastic, is Cultures and Faith's Granularity, which does something simply groundbreaking. Simulating the religious and cultural diversity of each location in the game, no longer are entire regions just made up of one faith or one people at the same time. Each location, depending on their histories, now consists of a variety of both, which is also reflected at game start, with certain regions being entirely homogeneous, while others are much more diverse. In one of the most fun campaigns I have ever played, I switched my character from the King of Sicily to the Queen of Jerusalem. This meant that I was now a ruler in a foreign land, and with none of my culture or religion present. This means that both me and my vassals spend time converting people location by location. With this mod though, a region is considered majority religion X and culture Y if the sum total of your X and Y is the highest with combining all locations in that region. In other words, you could have one city in a region be completely Muslim, while the number of Catholics in the other cities combined is larger than the amount of Muslims in the former, making Catholicism the majority religion, and you get to choose in which location you wish to convert. Not only is this mod immersive, but it also comes with mechanical changes. When there are more faiths and cultures present in the same place, we get religious or cultural strife due to the differences in the population, resulting in tax, opinion, and control laws depending on the amount of strife. This is great, but I do wish this part of the mod was expanded to include positive modifiers as well, perhaps based on cultural acceptance, which the mod already uses to lower levels of strife. But it would be nice to perhaps see things like innovation increase, diplomacy skill bonuses, or other types of boons when featuring a diverse city, as the medieval world was full of dynamic cities that featured several peoples and faiths at once. Either way, the concept of this mod is fantastic, and I love it even at this early stage. Now for a completely different mod, but arguably one of the most impressive mods ever made, for any game ever. Crusader Wars. And it's simple really. If you've ever felt like CK3's battles were lacking, that it took away from the experience to see two armies clash and duke it out with no input from the player, Crusader Wars has you covered, and allows you to use Total War Attila to play your battles manually on a grand scale. If there's one strategy game I've always wanted, it would be a combination of Paradox's deep campaign mechanics with Total War's battles. And with Crusader Wars, we are basically there, and it doesn't just work surprisingly well, but also does some incredibly impressive and immersive stuff. First of all, the mod manages to link Crusader Kings factions to those in Total War Attila while using corresponding mods, all laid out when you launch a battle. By default, and to keep with the spirit of CK3, you only get to play the battles commanded by your character, but this can be changed in the in-game menu, allowing you to play the battles led by more characters, or indeed all your battles. Not only are factions matched, but factors like units, battlefields and their weather and seasons, knights, the amount of each, and even entirely new skills based on CK3 traits are matched and inherited as well. Even the specific army numbers are present and accounted for, but this can even be altered in the launcher settings, allowing you to play smaller battles but proportional to the real numbers, for better performance for example, while every result is still accurately translated back into CK3 post-battle. The units even change with the times as you change the mods from say Attila's Anno Domini to MK1212, and even works fully with total overhaul mods like the Fallen Eagle and even Dawnless Days. And saying this, I can't believe it's true, it really is that impressive. One thing I've noticed, however, is that the enemy AI in Attila seems to be acting a bit differently than it normally does, often beginning completely out of sight of the player's army and marching forward in a way that's not very advantageous, and I hope this is fixable because it can lead to some awkward first stage of battles. But there are massive upcoming features planned as well. You can even look forward to culturally diverse armies within a single faction, which draws from multiple Total War factions at once to simulate a diverse empire, siege battles, and more. Honestly, if you haven't tried Crusader Wars yet, you absolutely need to, as it is in truth the most impressive literal game changer I've ever experienced, especially when considering the amount of polish and features, and since it technically doesn't change anything related to your campaign, I still consider it vanilla friendly, especially because you can always choose to fight your battles or not, deciding exactly when you wish to assume personal command. However, unlike the other mods, Crusader Wars does disable achievements, so keep that in mind if you feel like going achievement hunting. While the name is a bit confounding, Cultural Armies Redux with new art for Cultural Armies is what you need to use if you're not going to play with Crusader Wars, because these two mods are actually incompatible, and for good reason. Because while Crusader Wars meticulously maps each unit in vanilla CK3 to the various Total War mod Attila medieval mods, Cultural Armies adds entirely new units based on cultural factors to the game. It essentially replaces the generic names and UI art in the vanilla game with culturally appropriate names and images for men at arms, making CK3 a much more tailored cultural experience that really makes it feel like you are leading unique armies into war with every new realm. In other words, if you're not going to play Crusader Wars and lead your armies on the field, you owe it to yourself to download Cultural Armies Redux, which enhances CK3's campaign warfare immensely. And speaking of warfare, why not spice up the way your commanders work as well? With Commanders Plus, those warfare traits you gain from battles aren't just static anymore, but have been remade to function like the other progressive stats, meaning that the more you use your commanders in specific ways, like raiding, fighting in the field, and more, they accumulate experience in that trait, forcing commanders to actually earn their greatness with repeated action. I can't explain how much more dynamic this makes generals feel, and how much more it makes you want to use them because of it. In general, progressive traits are just better in my opinion, and adding on the fact that these new traits even show up in events makes Commanders Plus a no-brainer. Our next mod is a bit more subtle, but nevertheless one I absolutely adore, namely Patrum Scuta. This mod's aim is to make the coat of arms and family crests of our medieval world even more historical and beautiful, because it not only brings us entirely new and improved shield designs, but does it all in high definition, meaning everything looks that much sharper and more colorful. In fact, you might have noticed another major change here, namely the actual shape of our coat of arms as well. Now, I am a fan of CK3's banner-like designs for realms, but I have to say that returning to shields, but shields that look even slicker than those in CK2, it's actually really grown on me. They just look so beautiful, and even though I wish that Patrum Scuta managed to give Empire titles as much zest as CK2 gave to the Holy Roman Empire, it does extend the use of dynamic coat of arms for certain titles, and I truly love this new style now. Couple in as well the fact that we have a much expanded coat of arms designer, which truly lets you go to town, and this is in my opinion a must play, especially since it's so lightweight and integrates effortlessly into any campaign. Now for one of the more famous mods on the workshop, we have Regional Immersion and Cultural Enrichment, or RICE for short. I won't go into every detail of what RICE accomplishes, but the gist of it is that it adds a host of new culturally themed events, innovations, religious aspects, characters, building projects, and decisions to the game. Not only that, but it even adds what it calls 34 new flavor packs, which are essentially 34 special characters who have been given unique campaigns with special events. To add even further goodness onto this, we have more unique struggle regions that add a ton of flavor, like the consolidation of Normandy for example. There is so much depth to RICE that it's hard to fit it all into one section. But if you want more flavor and cultural distinctiveness to not just cultures, but to regions and characters, then RICE is exactly what you're looking for. And now for the workshop's most downloaded mod, and for good reason, we have Community Flavor Pack. Bringing tons more variety to characters' clothing, artifacts, traits, hairstyles, and so much more, Community Flavor Pack brings an unprecedented amount of diversity to CK3 that makes every character from over 50 cultures all over the world come that much more alive. But perhaps my favorite aspect of this mod is the fact that it's created entirely new 3D court models for very specific courts, most importantly bringing the courts of Byzantium, the Holy Roman Empire, and the Papal States to entirely new life, and made them entirely unique and grand on a completely different level. There isn't much more to say other than, again, this mod is simply astonishing and brings CK3 to completely new immersive heights. For our final major mod, we have a creation of my own, but which I thankfully received help and inspiration from other modders for, namely Andy's Ultimate Map Immersion. This is the mod I personally need the most in CK3, which is why I was so set on making it. To me, CK3's map fails in other areas other Paradox games succeed in, namely in the realm of focusing attention to your kingdom by way of Fog of War. Vanilla CK3 only really uses Fog of War on the lowest terrain level, while also fairly quickly removing the names of counties as you zoom. I also feel like the paper map itself is rather cluttered, and that it doesn't truly give me that map look I loved from CK2 and EU4. Well, with Andy's Ultimate Map Immersion, I'd say the glory of CK2 is back. Fog of War now lasts all the way until the paper map, highlighting only you or your allies in war's kingdoms from the terrain to the political level. In addition, the political map begins a bit sooner now, but the names of counties remain for much longer, and with the addition of a bit thicker borders, the map feels more distinct and drawn in. In other words, if you've been wanting a more immersive and dynamic CK3 map experience, then you've come to the right place. Now for some smaller mods but meaningful ones in rapid fire style that I truly think you should consider. COA Rally Points and Raised Army COA are two mods by the same modder that replaces those boring red and green flags with your actual coat of arms, embellishing your realm with this one simple trick, and it's simply astounding. NUI Realm Ledger brings an actual ledger into CK3, which is sorely missed in vanilla, and brings your realm, vassals, and even foreign title holders into one and the same neat menu. And not only is it beautiful to look at, but it neatly situates your counselors and most important vassals in one and the same menu. Just truly great stuff. Immersive negative trait removal allows you to get rid of a stress trait if you manage to keep your stress away until your next birthday. Realize 2.0 brings better eyes, less event spam, and stop plague and legends event spam, which makes those events a bit less rare to pop up, which makes for a smoother and more enjoyable, less spammy experience. Higher tier army units, which always displays those awesome elite knights for your army 3D models instead of peasant levies. More lifestyles, which brings the awesome lifestyles of prowess and leadership. Nameplates, which shows the name of characters in events. Better barbershop, which allows you to customize your character on a whole different level and put them in various cool poses for those kingly photo shoots. And lastly, but definitely not least, Crusader Kings 2 Music Complete, which adds that beautiful CK2 music into the game, which is an absolute must for me. And of course, the all-time GOAT, CK2 Christmas Carol for those dark December months, which always brings the holiday spirit. And now for those total conversion mods, and here's my list of the most crucial ones. The first mod on this list is none other than A Game of Thrones, a series that famously has incredibly successful book and TV series, but no real video game equivalent. Until now, of course, when the CK3 modders decided to make it happen. A Game of Thrones is nothing short of a full GOT strategy game in its own right, as long as you factor in that it's all based on CK3, of course. Because here, you get to dive into this universe like never before. Whereas the books or series depict only one period at a time, this mod allows you to dive into several of its most pivotal periods, including Robert's Rebellion, which takes place before the events of the show, and the actual events of the main TV show. In total, the start dates span almost 200 years of history, from the Targaryen reign under King Viserys I to Aegon V and all the way up until Robert. And due to the nature of CK3, this means that you get to play as any character in this universe at this time, like King Robert of House Baratheon, Lord Tywin Lannister, Renly and Stannis, and since we can choose to play as any ruler on the map, we get a host of new options, like Lord Jon of the Vale, Lord Eddard Stark of the North, to free city rulers like Prince Lario of Pentos, and any lesser vassal any of these rulers may have. Go deeper though, and you'll find that not only has the design of the map itself been changed to reflect the world of Westeros, being absolutely massive by the way and now including parts of the continent of Essos as well, but so has its city models. From the marvelous city of King's Landing and its towering red keep, to the beautifully medieval Casterly Rock and the large port of Lannisport on the coast below, to the ominous lordship of Pike, to the stunning Eyrie high atop the mountains in the Vale, the grey city of Winterfell and the wall of ice not too far to the north, this is a map of staggering beauty, and the dedication and skill of its modders are on full display no matter where you look. There's even a custom map table with Game of Thrones memorabilia and immersive artifacts, and of course, we cannot forget to mention the fully customized 3D throne rooms. Just look at how insane the royal court of the Lannisters, the Reach, Dragonstone, and the Iron Throne look. But this is of course mainly the surface, and Game of Thrones offers so many new gameplay features like all new religious aspects, new decisions, events, and a ton of other specific features like dragon gameplay, mega wars, and the ability to take the black and become a watcher on the wall. A Game of Thrones is the most popular total conversion mod of all time for a reason, and if you are a fan of Game of Thrones or want something new, you have to check this out. At number 2, we have Lord of the Rings Realms in Exile, one of the first and most impressive mods on the workshop period. But honestly, it offers arguably the most complete Lord of the Rings experience period, at least in the world of strategy. Middle-earth is recreated absolutely beautifully here, not just in a scale that makes sense and is reminiscent of the old Middle-earth games, but one that also brings forth beautifully crafted city models. Here, the capitals of Minas Tirith, Edoras, Isengard, and Barad-dûr are some of the highlights of this map. But of course, many more lie scattered across the campaign. What went for Game of Thrones remains true here as well, and while you can on the upper level assume the role of characters like Saruman, King Theoden, Denethor, or even Sauron, any character in the game on the lower levels are free for you to choose, and you're sure to find a character you remember from classic Lord of the Rings media. As you'd expect, the mod features all new events and decisions. We have completely new campaigns like the one of Aragon, where you must unite the Rangers of the North and decide whether you wish to claim the Throne of Gondor for yourself. All new 3D throne rooms increases immersion, and so does the soundtrack, which partly features those great musical pieces you've come to know and love from the movies and games. The fact that Realms in Exile is a modding project made by passionate people means that it never stops development until they call it quits, and so far, this has yet to happen. It also means that there are no limits in terms of what may be included, so the team is working hard to include both lesser known and all new regions as well. And while it is sad that it took a CK3 mod to create arguably the most fleshed out Lord of the Rings strategy experience ever, it sure is good that we have it, and we can again thank the tireless modders for their hard work. Total conversion mod number 3 is Elder Kings 2, a mod set in the universe of the Elder Scrolls and features the entirety of Tamriel. This is a massive project, not just because of its effort in representing the various races of this world and making them resemble their counterparts in the games you already know and love, but also because of its dedication to the source material at a gameplay concept level. You see, whereas CK3 offers various skills you can learn as you age and act, Elder Kings 2 adds a few more options, namely lifestyles related to magic and the supernatural. And just like in the game, you can actually specialize in arts like conjuration, destruction, alteration, illusion, and restoration, and dominate the world, because yes, you can actually use magic against other people and in various situations, bringing some of that Bethesda roleplay to the already roleplay-filled CK universe. There are so many ways and people to play here that it would take way too much time to explain it all, but whether it comes to different realms, races, time periods, or other backgrounds, Elder Kings 2 continues to be updated and supported. Perhaps my favorite addition so far, in terms of specific things, is that gorgeous Imperial City model, which looks near identical to the one seen in Oblivion and has each major district act as its own unique city within the larger Imperial City province. If you love the Elder Scrolls universe or need something a bit more crazy and high magic than the Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones, then Elder Kings 2 will probably scratch that itch. The fourth mod on this list stands out in most aspects, not just because it's the first historical mod thus far, but also because it only takes place in feudal Japan and the Sengoku period. To ensure that the game speed feels natural and that the player faces challenges, Japan is massive in this mod, with a ton of various rulers, new modifiers related to war acceptance and claims, and unique events which simulate the changing of the eras, as in going from pure close combat warfare to the introduction of guns and cannons. New accurate 3D cores representing the culture are present, and so are new armors and models related to the Japanese attire. Shogunate is a must-try mod if you love Japanese history as much as the modders do, and is indeed receiving continued support and updates from its creators. Our fifth entry is perhaps the mod that is personally closest to my heart, since it deals with intense historical time periods, namely the Fallen Eagle. This is a mod that takes us back to the late Roman period, a time and several bookmarks where the fate of Rome hangs in the balance and where your options for who to conquer is just as vast. Much like the time period it's based on, the starting position of the main bookmark is highly unique, because here, the two Roman empires reign supreme, occupying much of the known world between them, with only a few rival states in the vicinity, and a bunch of smaller ones littered around. But as you might expect, not all is as it seems. Internally, the Romans struggle with unruly vassals, varying economic situations, cultures that might be at odds, and a religious battle between the ascendant Christian church and the ancient pantheon. On its borders lie numerous and hungry tribes and kingdoms just waiting for an opportunity to strike, and if you are familiar with, say, Total War Attila, you will know exactly what awaits you. only now there are so many more cultures, factions, and characters open to you. Apart from the major obvious changes, the Fallen Eagle also features all new events, decisions, and unique characters finding themselves in special situations, like the rare kingdom of Soissons, a Roman enclave in Gaul, in a time when being a Roman in Gaul is highly lethal. Indeed, this mod is under continuous development, and a big focus of it is to offer several bookmarks with interesting situations, now spanning the 4th to the 6th century. One of my absolute favorite features of the Fallen Eagle is the addition of entirely new struggle mechanics that depict some of the major conflicts of the various eras. The Eastern Romans and the Sassanids will, for example, be constantly locked in a battle for the Near East, and in the Justinian bookmark, a unique struggle called Fall of Rome deals with the Eastern Roman Empire's reconquest of Italy and the Near East. A completely unique imperial setup mechanic, complete with internal factions, allows you to balance administrative, military, and legislative powers for increased privileges and varying vassal relationships, and a new system of trade aims to depict the financial power of important regions. You'll also notice a completely remade UI, which looks nothing short of fantastic, and I love the further dedication to art, because we even have new artwork for our new decisions, meaning as far as it goes, the Fallen Eagle is dedicated to creating a late Roman experience like never before, albeit one where you can now play as anyone in this vast world. And let's not forget about that gorgeous ancient Roman Constantinople city model, or the one for Rome or other cities out there of some significance. The Fallen Eagle is an absolutely fantastic mod and arguably my favorite on the list, exactly because of how much it speaks to me both as a history lover and as a procurer of deep mechanics and complex starting positions, and I highly recommend checking it out. At number 6, it's time to talk about Princess of Darkness. Now this is one wacky yet incredibly well-made mod that you need to check out if you're into the World of Darkness universe. Because here, the world of CK3 has been turned into a world of vampires, hunters, werewolves, demons, and other otherworldly creatures, a sort of shadow world if you will. Princess of Darkness, much like the Elder Scrolls mod, aims to completely change up what it means to play CK3. Because here, depending on your species, so say you're a vampire, you actually have a need for blood and for controlling your human subjects. To represent this, vampires for example now have 2 new gameplay mechanics. A masquerade exposure modifier to show how well you've blended in with the regular population, with higher levels threatening to have the Inquisition target and hunt you down, and the blood hunger modifier, which when satiated provides you with incredible stats, but when you go thirsty, raises your stress levels and threatens your life. A life, by the way, which unless you're killed, is basically immortal. There are entirely new skill systems here that dive deeper into what it's like to be a character in this world, and new events, decisions, and mechanics all aim at creating the ultimate World of Darkness strategy experience. There's so much more to say, but I think I'll leave it there. So if you're a fan of vampires and other creatures of the night, this should be a no-brainer. At number 7, we have Warcraft Guardians of Azeroth Reforged, and this is a mod I have to admit I never saw coming. It's exactly what it sounds like, a total conversion mod set in the Warcraft universe of Azeroth, with kingdoms, characters, and races you know from the games. With events that depict the wars and happenings, bookmarks that allow you to relive those Warcraft 3 memories on a grander scale, and all new mechanics that bring forth the Warcraft immersion, there is a lot to love here. Consider also the fact that the makeup of this world is rather special. Rather than taking place on a large connected continent, the world of Azeroth is largely divided into islands separated from each other by large swaths of ocean, meaning that global conquest takes on a different pace. With appropriate and lore-friendly governments, religions, cultures, and artifacts, Warcraft comes alive here, and there's even a new magic system, Legion invasions, and Black Empire events planned for future updates. So if you are looking for some of that old RTS nostalgia, but in a grand strategy package, then this might just be the mod for you. The number 8 most popular total conversion mod for CK3 is After the End, a mod that interestingly takes place in our own world per se, but shifts its site over to the Americas, but not the Americas we know. No, this is a mod that depicts a post-apocalyptic America, very post though, post-post if you will. In fact, the year is 2666, and everything is different. But whereas a series like Fallout comes across as dark and gritty, After the End is a lot more neo-medieval in nature, depicting a much more colorful and interesting universe that's radically different from anything else you've seen, with all new empires and societies, religions, cultures, and characters. Here, the empires of Brazil, Mexico, and the Holy Colombian Commonwealth are some of the strongest factions. We have completely new government types like High Republics and the Eureka bureaucracy, over 240 new faiths and religions, and hundreds of new 3D assets assets and other UI artwork. After the End is something completely different and breathes completely new life and stories into CK3. And if you want to play in the Americas but with a fresh new look and vibe, then check this out right now. Our 9th most popular mod is also perhaps the funniest in concept, because we are talking Tales of Ireland. Tales of Ireland is a total conversion mod that focuses purely on Ireland, but it does so with a twist. This is Ireland in the year 4800 after creation, roughly 400 BC, allowing us to make our way from the somewhat mythological heroic era to the arrival of Christianity. Ireland is now divided into more than 1,000 counties and 32 kingdoms, with a unique cattle herd system that determines your prosperity, an elected high king, a dynamic and dangerous partition succession system that breaks up entire kingdoms, new events, decisions, and even the possibility to become an Irish vampire or wolf walker. There's a bit of that supernatural stuff as well. In other words, if you love Ireland, new ways to play CK3, and some mythological stuff to boot, make sure to play Tales of Ireland. At number 10, we have The Witcher's Realms, a mod that takes CK3 into the world of The Witcher and wars between the Empire of Temeria, the Kingdom of Redania, and more. Featuring a beautiful map, characters you know and love, appropriate factions, and new visual assets, The Witcher's Realms is on its way to become a Witcher strategy game in its own right. But seeing as it's currently only in version 0.3.1, a lot of work remains to be done before version 1. And according to the roadmap, the future holds everything from the introduction of monsters to mages, new bookmarks and time periods, and a storyline or game mode focused on Geralt and Ciri. The Witcher's Realms is already exciting, and if you hunger for a return to this world, you better check it out. At number 11, we have God Herja, or Guharia, or God Heria, or whatever, The Dying World. And you know, even though every mod on this list knocks my socks off in terms of ambition, grandeur, and awesomeness, this mod is probably the one that surprised me the most. Because get this, God Herja is a fantasy total conversion mod, and while most if not all the other mods on this list is based on either history or an already established fantasy universe, this is actually a CK3 original, a mod and a world created solely for CK3. And I can't tell you how ambitious this thing is, but look here. This map is absolutely stunning, both in scale, shape, and scope. Everything feels unique here, from the design and varied landscapes of this world to its sense of brokenness and the mystical fog threatening to devour all, while the humans who once upon a time killed their own god now live in smaller fiefdoms or dying empires. With a brand new magic system including hidden spells, migration mechanics, new dynamic civil wars and religions, entirely new 3D models, assets, and UI elements, and again, an incredibly cool dark fantasy world, God Herja is as ambitious as they come, and is something both you and I need to dive into literally right now. Number 12, Way of Kings is a mod based on Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive and the world of Roshar, a massive undertaking with a bunch of unique features. First of all, this universe is kinda crazy. Its religions focus on discrimination based on eye color, or that certain people are not allowed to read. I don't fully understand it and I won't pretend to, but the concept of this universe does sound interesting and most of all, different. There's a difference between regular humans and the so-called listener race, but both can unlock different abilities and ways of playing, including having a magical friend by their side with various implications, like being able to teleport armies across the world through a portal system. There's even a civil lawsuit legal system for various things like claims. And of course, a big part of Way of Kings is its dungeon delving mod, where you can send expeditions in a darkest dungeon style way to eliminate enemies and hopefully emerge richer and stronger for it. Sadly, Way of Kings hasn't been updated since March, which is a bit longer than many of the ones on this list, so if you do try this mod, which you should, make sure to roll back your game to at least version 1.12.1. At number 13, we have Calradian Kings, a mod that takes place in the world of Mount and Blade Bannerlord. Now this mod I mentioned simply because of its cool concept, because it is in very early stages with not too much going on. The map and the Grand Kingdoms are present, and so are many of the important characters, but many of the main features like a civil war struggle, a senate, custom units and armor etc. is still to be implemented or fully completed. So if you want to experience a full mod, I suggest waiting a few months or years, but if you want a simple version of CK3 Bannerlord's experience, then feel free to jump in now. At number 14, we have Apotheosis, the Hellenistic Age, a mod taking place in the interesting time of the early 3rd century BC, located solely in and around the Aegean. This is an incredibly cool mod that totally converts everything you know of CK3 back to the post-Alexandrian era of smaller and larger Greek and Macedonian kingdoms vying for power with a brand new map, religions, government tiers like city-states, and so much more. But sadly, this mod too has yet to be updated since June 2023, so it's largely unplayable on any relevant patch. Still, the mod is being worked on and we can only hope for an update in the not too distant future. At number 15, we have the incredible and long-standing Bronze Age Reborn mod, taking us all the way back to the Bronze Age, featuring a brand new and detailed map spanning all the way from the Aegean to Persia. Originally based on the mod for Imperator Rome, it features those ancient cultures like the Minoans and the Mycenaeans, the ancient Egyptians, the Hittites and Sumerians, Akkadians, and so on, with appropriate clothing, religions, and customs. It also comes with 2 completely different bookmarks, allowing you to begin in either 2115 or 1590 BC, for wildly different takes on this period. There's so much more to this mod, like a new take on innovations and entirely new buildings, so if you love the Bronze Age and crave a deep dive, then Bronze Age Reborn is absolutely for you. And for the last of our relevant and semi-up-to-date total conversion mods, we have Age of the Fifth Sun, a mod that takes us back to the pre-Columbian Americas and the various Mesoamerican peoples and cultures that existed before the arrival of the European colonists. Here you can expect to see the religions and cults of the era, and the struggles between the smaller city-states and the larger kingdoms. This is another mod I'm not too familiar with, but which shows a lot of promise and holds so much goodness and immersion for those interested in this time period and setting, and I highly recommend checking it out if that resonates with you. And that, my friends, was an exhaustive list of the best total conversion mods for CK3 right now. Now, many of these are not fully updated for the latest patch, but they will be shortly or in the near future according to its devs, and might be updated when you watch this video. But even so, you can easily revert to a previous patch version for CK3 on Steam if you wish to play any of them and have them work. It's just insane what modders have done with this game, and what I trust they will continue to do in the future. But in a nutshell, this is Crusader Kings 3. It's become a beast of character intrigue and customization, and one that luckily, overall, has taken some incredible steps forward from what it was at launch. Other than CK2 of course, but honestly even then, I can wholeheartedly say that there is no game like CK3 out there. No game that focuses on such personal stories and progression, while also offering such a massive strategy experience that deals with all but every aspect of medieval life, from warfare to culture, religion, customs, language, court intrigue and administration, friendships, lovers and haters, child raising, kingdom forging and usurping, legacy creation, and finally the return of disease management. The sense of freedom and variety CK3 offers, and the legitimately crazy situations you'll find yourself in no matter where you play, is frankly quite unreal, and all of these factors contribute to a game that, despite perhaps not being the most focused or the most structurally perfect game, is wholly unique, getting better by the day, and truly worth spending hundreds if not thousands of hours in, just to experience what's next and to live out your medieval fantasy. But even so, what has the opportunity to elevate this experience further is the fact that CK3 isn't just single player, but a complete multiplayer game, allowing for you and your friends to go up against each other or on the same side depending on your ambitions, and play any character in the game at the same time. There's truly no limit here, and if you've ever seen a CK3 multiplayer battle royale with numerous players, you know just how fantastic this feature is, and how boundless the opportunities and outcomes are, since this is a truly living game that will never ever remain the same for every new playthrough. In short then, what Paradox has here is something truly unique, something whose faults I can forgive due to the game's very nature, and something that could only be built and made this great over time. If you have never played CK3 before, it's for sure going to take you some time to learn how to, but I know you'll get there. Because this game is so much fun to learn, and it's even more fun to know that you are learning, since when stuff begins to click, it's like a eureka moment every time. And that is Crusader Kings 3 in a nutshell. Thank you so much for watching, and for staying with me through this journey through one of the most diverse grand strategy games of all time. I want to thank my fellow YouTubers for lending me their thoughts and contributing to this review, and hope you'll check out each and every one of them, because they are part of making this community so great and lively. Now it's your turn to tell me your thoughts on CK3, how you feel the game's developed over the years, and your thoughts on its current and future state. Are there any features I've overlooked that needs more scrutiny or praise? Any mods you love in particular? Let me know all of it in the comments. Remember to leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this one. If you'd also consider supporting me on Patreon, I'd be truly grateful. And here at the end of all things, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.